If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What creepy paranormal sightings have you experienced as a child, or heard from your child, that terrified you to the core?
My 9-year-old stepkid saw the same ghost that I did. Although I don't consider myself overly spiritual, I believe that there are 3 spirits in my house: a mean old man, an old woman, and a little 5-year-old girl. I say this because I felt the mean guy dreamed about the old lady and undoubtedly saw the little girl one afternoon standing in the hallway. I obviously never mentioned this to the wife or kids. This morning on Halloween, while we were getting ready for school, around 6 a.m., my 9-year-old stepkid goes, "Whoa. I thought I just saw my 2-year-old daughter in the kitchen, and then she disappeared." I said that's crazy and asked what he saw. He described the height and dress of the little girl I saw months ago in the hallway. Pretty intriguing stuff. My mom told me a story about how when I and my siblings were babies, all a year apart, my brother 2, sister 1, and me newborn, we all started acting particularly fussy and upset for multiple days, and she didn't know why. One night, she woke up suddenly with a bad feeling and went to check on our room, which had 3 cribs. She told me that when she entered the room, there were tall black shadowy figures looking over each of our beds. She freaked out and went to wake my dad, who turned the lights on, and while he didn't observe anything, he believed her. At the time they were devout Christians, so he went in the room and prayed for hours. My mom waited in their bedroom, and when he came back, he woke her up, and she heard him tell her not to worry, it was taken care of. She told me when she turned over to look at his face, it was all warped and unrecognizable. The next day, she had a pastor come and bless the house, and she said they never had any more problems, and we stopped acting fussy. This story really freaked me out, though, especially considering she is not the type to exaggerate and hates talking about stuff like this. This is probably not uncommon here, but I saw a woman in white. I've been digging a few stories lately, and this seems like a common sighting from what I've gathered so far. We lived near a large lake that curved around the area, and our house was located at the end of the lake next to a forest. It was quite an isolated place, except for the bugs, but I enjoyed living there. The side we had to cross to get to our house directly had lots of public grills near the lake, one after the other, and right in the middle of the sequence of grills there was a pier where people often drove boats from. I was a teenager, driving with my parents home late at night. I was in shock when I saw the woman standing at the edge of the pier, all alone, in a very clean, full white dress and with long black hair. Seriously. She had her back facing us. My parents weren't looking, so they didn't see anything. I informed them only after we had already driven far away. I sometimes regret not telling them earlier and asking them to stop the car to see what she was doing there, just because I wish I could know what it was about. I think my child sees something. Hoping someone has some answers.
I, a 28-year-old female, have a 4-year-old daughter who has been talking about this little girl, Yola, since she was 2.5.
She would tell me about how she is a little girl with yellow hair and would tell everyone she told very consistent information. She also would insist that she does not like me and would scream at mommy while she was sleeping. I am not making this up, and it was completely on her own. Fast forward, we had moved homes and hadn't heard about Yola in at least 6 months when all of a sudden my daughter was swinging and casually told me Yola is back. The information she used to give, she gave again and told me she comes at night and sleeps on her carpet. My daughter has a very large imagination, so it is totally possible this is an imaginary friend. However, she never acts as though she is a friend. She tells me sometimes she's mean. She will gasp and say Yola is coming and doesn't talk to her when I am around, as I would imagine a child would with an imaginary friend. Does anyone have any insight? I'm a little creeped out over here, lol. Oh yeah, and tonight I heard my daughter's door open, and I went to check on her, and she was sound asleep in her bed, active REM sleep, and her door was open. When my son was around 4, his mom and I bought an old ranch home on 800+ acres. The house was approximately 90 years old, but its foundation had existed for around 160 years. After being there about 6 months, my son started talking about the brown man. He said he'd see him outside his window all the time. Occasionally, we'd go in his room, and he'd be staring out the window smiling/giggling. He'd say it was the brown man making him laugh. His mom and I grew concerned, especially me, as I do believe in the paranormal. Started asking questions. I asked my son if the brown man ever came inside the house. He said, he's not allowed because it's our house now. After about a year, my son stopped talking about him and seeing him. I asked my son what happened to the brown man. Son said, he went back to the woods to sleep. I can only assume it was a former homeowner that was buried somewhere on the property, and he just came to check out the new family and made sure we were worthy of his house. To add, my son is 14 now and fully remembers the brown man. We've talked about it several times. He says there 100% was a man dressed in brown at our old house that he used to interact with. He remembers never feeling scared, not even a little. The man would make silly faces that made him laugh and seemed really nice. The property consisted of over 800 acres that bordered a state park, and there were no neighbors within a couple of miles. I suppose there could have been an old man squatting/camping on my property, but I spent dumb amounts of time on that land in those woods. I think I would have noticed some sign of someone being there, but who knows? My little boy, foster child, now 4. He's been with us since he was 1. He stayed at my new apartment for the first time when he was 2, and his other foster mom and I had just split up recently. We were climbing into bed to read books so he could sleep, and suddenly he turns, looks at the corner behind where I sleep, and says, "Is that your friend, Mummy?" There was nothing there. It's just an empty corner. The next day he was playing on the floor with some blocks, and I heard him say, "What's your name?" And I peered over in time to see him tap his chest and say his name. Then your turn. Silence, but he's smiling. "Hi, Alex. We play." I asked what he was doing, and he said, "Your friend is gone, Mummy. My friend is here now." And pointed in front of him to thin air. I've lived here for 2 years now, and every single time he's here, he says he can see it. At night sometimes he wakes up stressed out and says, "It's coming to my side." When he wakes up, he claims to see it. Only one time have I ever seen anything when he was panicking, a black shadow hovering over him, and I said, "Let him sleep, he's a child." And I turned to my kid and said, "Just say no, thank you and close your eyes." So he did and fell asleep. Ducking freaks me out. Unsettling figures seen as a young child. I have had a lot of experiences that I consider paranormal, but the following ones stand out to me. When I was a young child, between 3 and 8, I would have terrible nightmares about a greenish figure that would attempt to kill me. At first, this may appear to be just a child's imagination running wild and might seem cliched. I believed that as well, until I connected my future experiences with those dreams. My first experience with a paranormal figure happened when I was 8 at my mom's house. I woke up in the middle of the night for some reason, and I turned to my right to look around my room, as my bed was pressed against the wall to the left. That was when I saw something, sitting on the chair next to me. It was tall, 6 to 7 feet, and had a large head. There was no other discernible feature. Terrified, and thinking that I was still asleep, I tried to close my eyes in the hope that I would wake up. I opened my eyes again and looked toward the chair. The figure was still there, and I saw that it was looking me over. By this point I was paralyzed with fear, as I now knew that this was not a dream. I must have passed out then, because I don't remember what happened next. When I awoke, there was nobody next to my bed. The second incident happened at my dad's house. I was just about to nod off to sleep when I turned to my right to get into a comfortable position once again. The wall I was looking at was illuminated by my nightlight, which also showed 3 figures in front of it. One was tall, one was small, and one was in between, and they all had either horns or long, sideways pointing ears. I couldn't tell the difference at that point. I screamed at that point, which woke my dad up and caused him to run to my room. I knew I wasn't dreaming then, because I watched as the figures disappeared as soon as my dad entered the room. I like to believe that those were simply childhood hallucinations, but I am beginning to doubt that due to the lividity of those figures. Those events also occurred within a week of each other, so I am left wondering if they are connected or not. Does anyone know what type of entity/creature/cryptid/demon could cause this? Or were these just hallucinations? I've seen a gnome. I was about 7 to 8 years old, and I was the last to fall asleep at a sleepover for the first time ever. My friend was sleeping on a cot, not a bed, and I could see from where I was sleeping on the floor under his cot, out the bedroom door, and into the bathroom down the hall, next to the master bedroom. The parents left the light on in the bathroom for us kids, and I look in there bored, because phones didn't exist yet, and see what I can only describe as a gnome. The creature was small, approximately a foot tall, dressed in bright colors like green and red, and it was rummaging through everything in the bathroom. I literally watched this turn over a trash can, go through that, open the counter below the sink, and go through everything in there, and then I watched it jump onto the toilet, onto the counter, and open the medicine cabinet and look through that. While it was going through the medicine cabinet, I guess it noticed I was watching because its head just snaps to me. I stare into its eyes frozen in terror, and I wake up with my friend's parents asking who made a mess in the bathroom last night. Scary shit for no reason that I remember around 20 years later. I think there is a child ghost either in my house or following me. I feel as if I don't have much evidence, but I really feel like there's something in my house or maybe following me. It started when I was very young. When I was a toddler, I visited a family member. Whenever I was there, I would play hide and seek. Whenever my mother asked who I was playing with, I would respond, "The boy who lives here." There was no boy who lived there. The family member who lived there had children, but they were adults and moved away. My mother thought this was weird, but to be fair, she said I was a weird kid. Even if this was an imaginary friend or something, I might remember him, but I really don't remember anything about it. When I was a baby, I had this lamb plushie that had a voice box that would say prayers. This one time my parents put me to bed and went downstairs. After a while they heard a voice coming from upstairs. They went to check, and the lamb plushie had left my cradle and ended up in the hallway against the wall. It was saying a prayer. My parents threw it out. My father doesn't believe in ghosts, and even he doesn't have an explanation for that. After a few years we moved away into a new house. I was maybe around 5 or 7. I was lying in bed. Through the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I looked up and saw a short figure run across the hallway coming from my sister's room. I got up and looked around and saw nothing. My sister was still in her bed. Sometimes I feel my hair being pulled lightly, and when I look back, I see nothing. Sometimes I hear whispers of my name and other things. I want to know if these are all coincidences or maybe there's actually something going on. Paranormal childhood experience. When I was 12, my little brother, older sister, 2 friends, and I frequently went biking down the dirt roads of our small city in the Canadian prairies. There was an abandoned farmhouse in the middle of nowhere that we came across one summer afternoon. It sat about half a kilometer deep in the fields, so we had to leave our bikes back to trudge through the thick grass/obstacles in the way to get to the actual barn house. Being kids, we were all pushing each other to go first, getting more scared as we got closer. By the time we were about 10 feet from the main front porch entrance, I had a shiver literally shoot down my spine. I immediately looked at my sister and told her that heading back wasn't a wise idea. She reassured me everything was okay and it was just creepy looking. I reluctantly agreed, and we went inside. As soon as we entered, the main floor area felt cold. This was on a hot summer day. Around the living room corner was the dark abyss that led to the basement. The one friend with us decided to act cool and went down quick without even telling us. He was down there not even a minute before he ran back outside with his face as pale as a ghost. Dylan, the tough friend in our group, appeared so shaken that we all immediately ran out to our bikes. This is where shit gets crazy. As we were rushing out, we heard random music coming from upstairs, reminiscent of a really old record player. We never had the opportunity to look up there, only exploring the main floor while Dylan quickly checked the basement. At this point my legs felt weak, and it was almost like in a dream where you can barely make it back to your bike. Dylan's bike chain was torn off, and his tire was popped. He started crying like a madman, so we ditched his bike, and he hopped on one of our handlebars, and we got the hell out of there. This is the part where it may be difficult to believe, but I know it's true because my sister has also seen it with her own eyes, and she is the last person to believe in the paranormal. When we were a safe distance away but still in viewpoint, my sister and I looked back and both saw a dark gray, almost smoky shadow-like figure standing at the top window. We never told anyone else in the group because we didn't want to freak them out any more than they already were. This is a day that I will remember for the rest of my life. The barn house isn't there anymore, and I haven't been to an abandoned place since. There is one paranormal experience that I had when I was a kid that I often recall. I was about 8 years old. The incident was my first paranormal experience and still freaks me out to this day. My best friend had a wealthy grandmother in Essex, England. She had a 3-story Victorian house, which I often stayed at. I once stayed there alone after school, waiting for her mom to pick us up around 5 p.m. We were bored in the house, and so we decided to have a look in the 3rd floor cupboards. We found many random, empty diaries and notebooks, which we took to the treehouse at the end of the garden, where we played by writing nonsense in them and pretending to be bookkeepers and shopkeepers. The treehouse was like a 5-minute walk away from the back entrance. The backyard was huge. As we were playing in the little treehouse, we both heard her mom's voice coming from the house saying, "Girls. Girls. It's time to go, come on and let me in." We didn't expect her for at least another hour, so her voice confused us both. We reluctantly walked through the backyard and into the house. We kept hearing, "Girls. Girls. Let me in, it's time to go home." There was also a loud banging on the front door. We were cautious, so we looked through the front window before answering the door. We noticed that her mom's car was not in sight and could not see who was banging on the door. We both freaked out and ran to hide upstairs in the third-story wardrobe. The banging stopped after about 5 minutes, but we both stayed up there for a good half hour until my friend's brother came home and opened the front door himself. Has anyone ever had a similar experience? This entity had taken on the voice of my friend's mom and was asking us to let it in, and we almost did. Not my kid but my niece. Disclaimer that I'm an ardent skeptic that believes essentially nothing metaphysical, but I have nothing for this one. She was almost 5 and living with my sister in an apartment complex. Shortly after moving in, my niece began to enter my sister's room at night, terrified by the presence of a man in her room, along with reports of strange noises and TVs turning on and off by themselves. The first time it happened, my sister freaked out, thinking someone was in the house, but then it became a regular thing. When asked more about it, my niece said the man would swear at her and tell her she needed to get out because she didn't belong there. Then my sister met a neighbor at the complex's playground and found out that the person who lived there a year or so before her was a single dad who overdosed in the apartment. His young son, whose room was the next room over, now my niece's, found him. The whole thing. So my mom, who believes in all this, had my sister dig around and try to find his name, which they did, and they tracked down his obituary. So we were at my mom's house, and they left his picture up on the computer screen and called my niece into the room. Without anyone saying a word, not about their place or the man or anything, not a word, my niece immediately recognized the man's face and ran out screaming about the man in her room. We moved them out not long after because it just kept happening and they didn't know what to do. As I mentioned, I am a strong skeptic of anything supernatural. However, considering the entire story and my niece's absolute certainty that the man on the screen was the one in her room, I cannot explain it. I was told this story about myself on a long motorway journey back from a football match with my dad back in 2011. I'm 27 now and live in the East Midlands, UK. Shortly after I turned 18 in 2011, my dad told me this story about me from back when I was 6, and I've found it disturbing ever since. This happened in 1999. My dad was a devoted member of the church at the time, with 2 young children, me, 6, and my sister, 3. After we'd had our dinner one evening, 2 men knocked on our door and tried to talk to my dad about their beliefs. I have no idea what they were or what they stood for, but after several minutes of getting nowhere with my dad, they gave him a little booklet about their views. My dad felt uneasy about it and has since said he bitterly regrets it, but he took the booklet, despite feeling it had brought a somewhat sinister energy into our home. He then went about his evening, entertaining his 2 young kids and eventually putting them to bed. Later on into the night, when it was time for him and my mom to go to bed, he went into our respective bedrooms and prayed for us as he did every night of our childhoods, just the usual good health/happiness prayer any Christian father does for his kids. With my 3-year-old sister, everything was fine, and nothing was wrong. However, when he went into my room to do the same, something very odd happened. He did his usual prayer for health and happiness, with me totally conked out asleep, but then I did something he's never been able to explain. As soon as he said, "Amen," I bolted upright at 90 degrees, opened my eyes fully, with my face looking at the ceiling, and let out a shrieking animalistic growl, lasting just a couple of seconds. At such a low pitch, no grown man could even replicate it. He said there was no color in my eyes at all, just pure black. I then flopped straight back to sleep and, apparently, could not be woken up, even after several attempts to jolt me awake. I'm careful who I tell this story to, especially my ex-partners who have shared a bed with me over the years, but it makes me feel terribly uneasy. I've had many other strange experiences in my life that I can't explain, and occasionally I wonder if they're linked to what happened that night. I would not describe my father as a humorless individual, but he is a serious person and not particularly inclined toward storytelling. I am confident that he would only share this with me if it were entirely true. This is especially true given that he only confided in me when I was an adult. Do any of you have any similar stories from your childhoods that haunt you as an adult? Ghost of a child? This phenomenon has been observed by many of my family members. I believe the first to witness this was my little brother. He said he saw a little boy in our bathroom. At the time he was too short to see the mirror above the sink, so it was that. He ran over to my grandmother crying, more scared than I've ever seen him. The next person to observe it was me, in a dream at least. I was in my house and was walking to the bathroom at night in the dark when I had opened the door. Deeper into the bathroom's closet I saw the floating clothing of a child, no older than 4 years old. I felt an intense spike of adrenaline so sharp that it felt like I had gotten shocked, and I had a feeling of, I have to leave here now. It was at that point that I woke up. The third person to experience an uneasy feeling was my sister. She was scared to sleep in her room. She's 3 years younger than me, so she's old enough to know what's real and what's not. I didn't question it and told her she could sleep in mine. One final encounter that sent me into flight mode was when I was downstairs in my kitchen at around 10 to 11 p.m. It was around Easter, and there were all sorts of summer toys down there, one of which was a pinwheel on the countertop. As I was doing my thing, the pinwheel started spinning ever so slightly, not rocking back and forth, but making slow, full rotations. I ran upstairs as fast as I could and let my family, who was still awake at the time, know about what just happened. We had cleansed the house with holy water and placed little glass vials of holy water with a cross on all window sills. Since then I haven't noticed anything unusual, or at least not to that degree of activity. Looking back, I still can't think of what exactly it looked like to my brother. The other day my 3-year-old son was sitting at the dining room table at dinner, blinking his eyes really fast. I asked what he was doing, and he responded, totally straight-faced and unbothered, "I'm looking at the man who walked into the kitchen. When I blink my eyes like this, I can see him standing behind mommy." "Can you see him standing behind mommy? What does he look like? What's he doing?" I asked. "He's all black and has no face, he's just standing there watching mommy. Sometimes I see him walking around the house, but he never looks at me." We live in a very old house and know that the original owner, the man who built the house, died there in the 50s. We've always talked about a ghost in the house but weren't totally serious. My son's comment made the hair stand up on my neck. I've heard others talk about stories where their young kids saw things that creeped them out. What have your young ones said that has made your hair stand on end? My dad took the family to the Crenshaw House, a place on the reverse Underground Railroad. I was 9 or 10 and an avid reader, especially of history. I knew what the Underground Railroad was, but in the 1980s, I can honestly say my father was the only person who touched on the idea of people being kidnapped and sent back into slavery. He has always been fascinated by local history and recognized my love of it early on. My father also knew the owner of the place we were going, which is now owned by the state of Illinois but not open to the public. At the time, my brother was about 5 or 6 years old and began to lose his composure before we arrived, repeatedly saying, "I don't want to go. I don't want to go." He was utterly inconsolable by the time we pulled up at the house, which just looked like a huge, old, but fancy, farmhouse. My dad walked up to the front door, and his friend led us to a concealed door on the side of the house. I barely noticed the keyhole in the siding. When the key clicked into place, the door popped open to reveal the darkest, narrowest staircase I'd ever seen. It was one of the hottest days of the year, and yet this staircase was hotter. The air was stagnant and oppressive, and I felt a knot in my stomach as my dad asked me to follow him up the stairs. When we finally made it to the hidden top floor, it was somehow even hotter than the staircase. Tiny slivers of windows that didn't open revealed iron rings fastened to the floor, separated by wooden cubicles. The whole room felt as if it were whispering from every corner. And the final horror, large rings, fastened to center support beams, were clearly used as whipping posts. As I walked up to these rings, the conversation between my father and the homeowner faded away, and the whispering grew louder. The room suddenly got cold. I have no idea how long I stood there, trying to make out what was being said from the corners of the room, when suddenly my dad comes back up the stairs and says we're leaving. When I visited this place, I only knew it as the old slave house. This was in the mid-1980s. I've had many spooky things happen since then, but nothing has made me feel the same feelings of abject fear as being in that attic space. I didn't understand it, and as soon as I left I was fine. Was there something paranormal that targeted me as a child? 2 days ago, I came to the realization that the same thing might have caused 2 different paranormal experiences. When I was 6 or 7, I'm not sure, for about 2 months something kept calling me by my name whenever I was alone. It called mostly when my parents were smoking. After about a week of this, I started covering my face with a pillow and lying on the couch when my parents were going for a smoke. This made me even more scared because the moment I would cover my face, it would become really cold, and I felt like something was always standing in front of me just watching. During this time, I also had a nightmare that would come pretty much every 3 to 4 days. In the dream, I would be playing with Legos on a table, and one of them would fall down onto the table, and when I went down, I would become pretty much paralyzed. I couldn't even move an eye. Even worse, the same voice would start saying my name over and over again, and all I would see is red. Everything in front of me was red, no other color other than different shades of red. After 2 months, the calling stopped, and Dream 2 also ceased. This happened when I was going to 3rd grade, so I was either 8 or 9 when it happened. It happened 3 or 4 times anyway, when I would walk out of the hallway and start walking to the door outside. I would stop being able to do anything, not even move my eyes, and I would feel like I was levitating, not sure if I did, but I 100% did not feel the floor. It would feel like hours, but every time it happened, I was on time to school, so it 100% did not last longer than, 3 minutes. The more I think about it, I think that it was the same thing mostly because of the dreams. I became paralyzed in them too. Nothing paranormal has happened since then to anyone in the apartment, as far as I know. Do you think it could have been the same thing? Childhood experiences. So I've never shared this with anyone except my wife and my mother. Growing up we lived in an old townhouse complex. I used to wake up terrified, unable to move anything except my eyes. And there would be a man standing at the foot of my bed, wearing a cowboy hat, arms crossed. He would just stand there and be gone, and then I could move again. This happened to me from the ages of about 6 to 12 until we moved. Not every night, but probably about once a month or so. I never told anyone about it for years, I just kept it to myself. In my early 20s I was visiting my parents and finally told my mother about what used to happen. She was absolutely floored and then went on to tell me when we lived in that house, it used to happen to her as well. For about the same amount of years, until we moved and they bought the house they now live in.
I'm not quite sure how to explain the feeling of both relief and terror I felt knowing that A, I wasn't crazy and B, this man was also troubling my mom.
My dad worked in a remote work camp and was gone 15 days at a time. This only ever happened when he was away. We talked to him about it after we discovered we both had these experiences, and he thinks we're nuts. I just wanted to share this. I drove past the old house where this incident occurred, and even being close to it gave me the creeps. I remember once my grandmother stopped by to visit when we lived there, and I'll never forget she just looked around and said, "This is a busy place." Another strange thing that used to occur in the same house, we had 2 cats, and they used to just sit at the bottom of the stairs and look up at the landing, like they were watching someone. The landing at the top overlooked the stairs, and I used to feel like someone was looking down at me when going up them all the time. The one cat we had would just sit there sometimes for an hour or more, staring. The bedrooms were on the top floor. Anyways, thanks for listening, it feels good to get this out here. I'll also add, I have had no other experiences since then. When we first moved to the new house, I was terrified that whatever had haunted my nights would find me again. The house my parents bought was only about 2 blocks away. I live in Maine, and my sister is a massive Stephen King fan, a constant reader if you will. When the 40th birthday rolled around, they came up for a week-long visit culminating in a day-long tour of Bangor, a fresh new King-themed tattoo, and many happy memories. They left Friday, and I went back to work Saturday. When I got home from work that Saturday, there was the strangest odor in the foyer. Sauerkraut? Spoiled apples? It wasn't awful, We lived in a house built in the 1800s, which had been converted into 6 apartments, half on the ground floor, the other 3 upstairs. Our apartment was on the ground floor, and once inside, I detected no strange smell and shrugged it off. About 30 minutes later, there was a knock at our door, and it was the older lady who lived directly above us. And she wanted me to come upstairs and knock on Unit 6's door with her. Folks, I can connect the dots, especially since the strange smell had not diminished at all, and I was working in public safety at the time, so I was familiar with this situation. To summarize, we called the police, who forced entry into the apartment, and sure enough, my upstairs neighbor was found deceased. But not just the deceased. They were deceased. For, a while. Weeks, maybe. The sweet lady in Unit 5 had been sleeping in her living room with the windows open for 2 weeks. She didn't want to be a bother, so she never called property management or said anything, assuming it was a rat or some such. She also had strewn flower petals up and down the stairs. She had written RIP on post-it notes and put them all over the walls up and down the staircase. She had torn up cigarettes and left tobacco everywhere and was holding a sage stick and abalone shell in the foyer when the funeral home personnel arrived. In the midst of all this, my grandson, who was staying with us, had to go to bed. They were 3, and we were in the habit of putting them to bed by turning on the night light and some music, then sitting at the foot of their bed while they fell asleep. That night we did our normal bedtime routine, and while I was sitting at the foot of their bed, my sweet grandson said to me, in his precious little voice, "Grandma, see the man? See the man, Grandma? You all. Look. I'm the crystal ant in my family. I have tarot decks and oracle cards, there's a candle and incense burning on my shelf right now." I was not prepared. All I could think of was to say, he should be moving along now. Kiddo just fell asleep without saying anything else, and I went around opening windows, swept the house, and endured the eye rolls from my This is a story about my childhood experiences with paranormal activity. When I was younger, I was told that I attract paranormal activities, and my mom shared a confusing story from when I was about 4 years old, in which she found me crying and pointing to the window in the living room. She checked the window but found nothing there. When she asked what was wrong, I told her, "Mama, I saw a man in the window," describing him as pale, tall, and pointy. Like any mother not in some horror movie, she took me and ran outside and drove away. I have no memories of that, but I do have one memory of my late Grammy's house. I was around 6, and I was playing with this girl in my Grammy's room, and of course my Grammy was confused, so she called me to come in the living room and asked, "What are you doing in there?" I stated I'm playing with this girl who is wearing something Aunt Name was wearing. My Grammy's sister, who was over at her house, my aunt told me to tell the girl to go to her grandma, and I told the girl, who said her grandma's dead. So my aunt then said to tell her to go to heaven with her grandma, so I told the girl that, and she started walking up a cloud of stairs to a bright light. I don't remember anyone who looked like that girl in real life close to me or remember seeing her face, so I'm not sure if that's a dream or not. Another story about my mother's sister, I'll call her Aunt N, and when Aunt N was 4, she was in a corner looking at a wall, rocking back and forth and mumbling in Portuguese. None of my family on my mom's side, she knows, speaks Portuguese at all. And when they turned her around to see what was going on, Aunt N was sleeping. Child ghost. My family and I, me, my husband, my 3-year-old daughter, and my 2-month-old son, moved into a rental home in College Station, Texas. This home was built in the 70s. After about a month of living in our home, our daughter, who has always slept well through the night, started waking us up multiple times a night. One night she woke us up by climbing in our bed crying. We let her sleep with us, and in the morning she said she saw a ghost with a blanket over their head. My husband and I thought it was a dream because most kids see ghosts depicted in shows with a white sheet over their head. A few weeks later, I woke up at night to feed my son. I put him back in his bassinet by our bed and was lying in bed facing his bassinet trying to fall back asleep. I then see a figure the size of my daughter with a blanket over their head walk by the bassinet, look at my son, and run out of the room. Mind you, our daughter never just comes in and leaves without saying anything. I thought it was strange and got up to check on her. She is sound asleep in her bed. Then, a few nights later, I feel a tickle on my toes at night in bed. One time, while my daughter and I were having a disagreement, the lights started flickering. I have always believed in the supernatural, but my husband has always been a skeptic. Until he saw it himself. One night lying in bed, he felt a brush on his arm and saw a figure by his bedside run off. He got up to check on our daughter, and she was dead asleep. I called my mom one day to tell her about all of this, and she said she saw the same spirit in her home. She was babysitting my daughter one weekend at her home and got up in the night to get some water. She saw a small child in the dark hallway, so she went to check on my daughter, who was dead asleep. Do we have a child ghost in our home? Did the child ghost follow my daughter to my mom's house? How can we get the history for our rental home? I had paranormal experiences as a child. When I was about 10, I had my room upstairs, and my parents were downstairs. I have always had trouble sleeping. I remember trying to fall asleep when my computer suddenly started beeping. I had never heard it do that, and it was shut off. I sat up, and suddenly my bed began to shake violently and move up and down as if someone were underneath it pushing it. My computer chair was knocked over upside down while this was happening, and the legs started spinning. My closet doors were opening and closing. I couldn't talk or scream. I just remember closing my eyes and pretending nothing was happening. After about a minute, they all stopped. I told my parents, and they never believed me. My mom had come in the room and put my chair back. A few years later I went to go in my sister's room, and as I walked by mine, my door slammed shut. Nobody was in there, and the windows were closed. Has anyone ever had something happen they can't explain and nobody believes them? Toddler and possible paranormal. My daughter is 3. She's always slept with me due to lack of space. We've always shared a room and a bed. We just moved into our house, and I hyped her up about having her room and her bed, and she was ecstatic. I had her help me decorate her room, move her bed around, put her toys away, and make her bed. The first night she slept here, she ran to the living room screaming and crying that she was scared in the middle of the night. I didn't wake up, but my siblings heard it and let her sleep with them. Now she's petrified to go back in that room. She won't go in there unless someone is with her. We've placed night lights in the room and left the closet light, bathroom light, and hallway light on. Even in the day, she will not go in there alone. Fast forward to tonight, she's in my room, and she makes a beeline towards me, completely hysterical, saying that she's scared of the man walking on the ceiling. Then she claims it's Lauren on the ceiling scaring her. Lauren is a longtime friend of ours that just passed in February, and my daughter was very close with her. She's literally in my arms shaking. So I bring her back into my room and tell her to point to what's scaring her. She points at the ceiling directly above where she was sitting, saying someone scared her. I've asked her multiple other times to tell me what's scaring her, and she just looks blankly ahead of her and doesn't speak. Now she's clingy, aggravated, and won't leave my side whatsoever. Are there any tips anyone can give me? We moved into this house on Monday. It is an older house, it just had remodeling done. I fully believe that children do see things that we cannot see. I just need tips on what to do now. She's never done this, has never been this way, and has never claimed to see people on the ceiling. Could it be stress? Or something much more? I lived in a haunted house. Everyone in my family experienced weird stuff, but this is what happened to me. I was young, and whatever it was, it showed up differently for each of us. For me, she came as an evil witch. I saw her in my dreams and while I was awake. At least once a week, I'd have these horrible nightmares where she'd chase me and kill me every single time. One night, in a dream, she grabbed my hands like we were holding them, and when I woke up, I was sitting up in bed, still in that exact position. She used to pull the covers off my bed at night. We had 2 cats, one would sleep with me and the other with my sister, like they were trying to protect us. I won't go into what happened to the rest of my family, but my sister definitely had it rough too. I was terrified to go to the bathroom at night because it was downstairs. So yeah. I wet the bed until I was 6. I was just too terrified. She also used to turn the bathroom lights off while I was in there, like she knew I was afraid. There was this one early morning, I woke up before 9, and my parents always said, if the clock says anything below 9, stay in bed, so I was just quietly playing on my DS. And that's when I saw her. She was standing at the end of my bed. Barely a figure, but I could feel her rage. I could see it. She looked furious, like she couldn't get to me because I wasn't dreaming. And then there was the voices thing. Sometimes, from the sitting/living room, we'd hear people talking, voices that sounded like actual conversations. Once, at night after yet another nightmare, I walked downstairs since I could hear my parents mumbling at each other. I heard my mother's voice behind the door. I clearly heard someone say, "Come in, love. What's the matter?" So I opened the door. The room was pitch black. Empty. When I was around 16, my mother told me when I was napping as a kid, she came in to check on me, and found the string from the blinds wrapped around my neck. Another incident occurred when my sister, who had recently acquired a new bed, left the old bed frame near the stairs. I was passing by it, the floor was not slippery or anything, and I simply slipped unexpectedly. The frame fell on top of me. Thankfully my dad was nearby, but still, nothing about it made sense. That house nearly destroyed our family and seemed to threaten both my sister and me. When my boy hadn't long started walking, we put him to bed one night. He woke up during the night and tried to come through to our room. He started screaming. We went through to his room and found him sitting in the middle of the floor, picked him up, and took him through to our bed. It wasn't until the morning that we realized he was struggling to walk. We took him to the hospital, and it turned out he had an ear infection. That's why he was on the floor. Anyway, he was fine, but cut to a few months later, and out of nowhere he starts talking about the night he got dizzy and couldn't walk. We were like, "Yeah, you had a wee ear infection that made you dizzy, and you were crying." He turns round and says, "I wasn't crying because I was dizzy, it was because of the shadows coming to get me." We asked a bit more. The shadows came out of the walls, but it was only one that was trying to get him, the one in the corner, the others were looking after him. That's why he now sleeps in our bed. Apparently the shadows can't come into our room. He still brings it up. I think it's now permanently his first memory, a good creepy one, though. It probably explains his love for spooky, creepy stuff. He says he wants us to decorate his room and make it spooky. Personally, I think if he has shadow people in the walls, that's spooky enough. Paranormal encounters in the childhood home. I was hoping to get some thoughts and inputs on if anyone has experienced something similar. This was luckily a one-off experience for me. When I was younger, I was sleeping in my childhood home with my dog in bed right next to me. I awoke very late at night, I think around 2 a.m. or so. I remember shooting straight up in bed and feeling alarmed or startled and looking around the room. My eyes would not adjust to the darkness, and several seconds later, a very loud and angry male voice yelled, "Ah!" After the single long yell, the room was dead silent, and me being young and scared, I did what any kid would. I sank back into bed and put the covers over my head with a peeking hole. I looked at my dog, who was alert, ears perked up, looking at the center of the room as if he had heard it too. But my dog did not seem alarmed or scared, he just kept looking, and after a while, he settled down and tried to sleep. After maybe 10 minutes of lying under the covers and my eyes adjusting to the darkness, I gathered enough courage to turn the lights on. There were no open windows and no electronics, such as a TV, turned on in the house. Around that same age I also experienced all the doorknobs in the house turning at the same time from left to right over and over again while I was pooping. At first I only noticed the bathroom doorknob. It freaked me out, and I was home alone with my dog. My dog got freaked out and ran down into the basement. That's when I realized all the bedroom doors were doing the same and all the doors in the basement when I went to grab him and leave the house. Since then I've noticed smaller occurrences when I visit, such as shadows peeking around corners and random noises like dishes moving or cabinets creaking as if being opened when nobody is in the kitchen. Unexplainable childhood experience. This happened when I was in 8th grade, so I would have been 13 at the time. I was sitting in my room playing video games one evening when I heard something repeatedly hitting my window. It was kind of windy, and I'm used to tree branches tapping the sides of my room, so I thought nothing of it. Something to note about my room is that it has a huge window facing west, which means light from the setting sun goes directly into it. For this reason, I keep a curtain over the window, but in the evening I can easily see the silhouette of anything in front of the window through the curtain. After 30 or so seconds I start to get annoyed at the banging, so I turn to the window, expecting to see a low-hanging tree branch or something of the sort. Instead, I see the silhouette of a toddler-sized hand repeatedly hitting my window. Once I notice it, it bangs on the window 2 more times, stills for a moment, then waves at me and disappears below the windowsill. I was terrified for a few reasons. 1. I knew for a fact I was home alone. 2. I live on a private road at the top of a hill with no direct neighbors, meaning that for someone to get up to my house, they would have had to pass through a locked gate on the road and somehow be stealthy enough to not alert my dogs, who bark at anything and everything. 3. Right after this happened, I checked around that entire side of the house to see if anything at all could have caused what I saw and found absolutely nothing. When my parents arrived home that evening, I inquired about what it might have been, but they did not genuinely believe me and simply attributed it to a tree branch. It has been nearly 6 years since this occurred, and I still do not know what it was, nor have I encountered anything similar since. I wouldn't say such an event is enough to call my house haunted, but it freaked me out to the point that I still recall this experience from time to time. Fairy, or at least what I'd call a fairy, encounter as a child. This experience is about 20 years old by now. It happened when I was probably between 7 and 9. So take it through a childhood memory lens. Some needed context. I grew up in the South African veldt. It's flatlands, you can see to the horizon in every direction. Grasslands and farmlands mostly. Some bushes and the odd camelthorn tree as well. I know this happened over a weekend during school or church camp. And a popular game we used to play during that time was lantern crawl. Basically the rules are you play it during the night, and someone, usually the teacher or some other adult, sits in the camp with a lantern and a spotlight. Kids get dropped off like a mile from him. Kids spread out and have to try and sneak up and touch the lantern to win. The guy in the middle tries to spot them in the dark. If he shines his spotlight on you before you touch the lantern, you're out. So the game involves you, as a small kid, walking and sneaking through the veldt alone for a couple hours. Preferably on nights when it isn't very bright. Okay, with the context out of the way, here's my experience as best I remember it. Walking past some bushes, I turned my head and saw the moon on the horizon. Or at least I remember thinking it was the moon. And that I was uneasy because it was off. It was perfectly round, there wasn't a crater on it, and it just felt wrong. It was probably just a second or two before I realized it wasn't the moon. It was a silver orb floating along next to me, keeping pace. Probably beach ball size? But maybe smaller because I was small, so maybe baseball. Somewhere between those two. Shining silver sphere, though, I'm sure of that. Well, it didn't stay long. Maybe a few seconds before it was gone. My memory is of it just zooming away, but it feels more like it just disappeared. Like it was there 1 second, gone the next. Now I know all the logical or alternative explanations. But I really don't think I just imagined it, because it has been a vivid memory I've had most of my life and feels the same as my first day of school or my first rugby game. Natural phenomenon is something that's been brought up to me before, like ball lightning or fluorescent lights or something like that. And sure, I can see that. Except it felt like it was watching and following me, keeping my pace even as I changed mine. It felt like it was alive. I often hear about aliens, but I don't give it much importance due to my personal bias. So yeah, I truly believe I saw a fairy when I was a kid, or at least something that people would call a fairy. Ended up writing more than I thought. Living in the States now, and with Halloween coming up, we were talking about our IRL supernatural experiences. This is pretty much my only one. But I thought I'd share with you all as well because it's one of those things that comes back to my mind every now and then. So please share your thoughts. A small story of something that happened when I was a kid. One time my dad and I were watching some TV together in the living room, and I heard something fall in the bathroom down the hall. I went to investigate and found that it was a can of Febreze. The can was put behind some other stuff, like hair gel and shit, before it fell, so it was fairly secure. Weird, but this kind of shit happens in our house all the time. We could be showering and see a shadowy figure about the size of my sister on the other side of the curtain, but when we look, no one's there. Or like when our 3 dogs, Japanese chins, bark at areas of the house when nothing is there, for example. Around 5-10 minutes later, we hear music. It sounds like it's coming from outside, so we go out to tell whoever is blasting it to shut up. But when we got outside, there was nothing. Just the sounds of the summer breeze and birds. We head back in, and we hear the music again. We look everywhere and can't find it. The music seems to follow us wherever we go. My dad realizes what's happening and tells the spirits to stop, as usually telling them to stop makes them stop. They don't, so he decides to smudge. After he goes through the whole house, the music stops. This is just the tip of the iceberg for shit that happens in our house, and it's just the tip for shit I've personally experienced. The spirits usually do harmless stuff, so we don't really mind it. Small story, and certainly not as scary as the rest I see here, but I thought I'd share it. I experienced many paranormal things from my childhood into my teens. Here are some of my experiences. Before sharing my experiences, I want to emphasize that many of them occurred due to my traumatic childhood, and I believe that when someone is stressed or struggling with their mental health, they become more vulnerable to paranormal phenomena. At least, I always feel that my experiences worsened when I was in a more emotional state, as if these entities knew I was struggling and fed off that energy. I also think that the more you tune into these things and listen, the more you'll hear, for better or worse, so you need to be careful. If anyone can provide any explanations for these experiences, it would be greatly appreciated to ease my mind. These are all from when I was around 12 to 19 years old. 1. Shadow Man in my hallway. When I was younger, at around 8 p.m., I was home alone. I had turned the hallway light on, and as I turned the corner to walk down the hallway, I saw a tall, dark, man-shaped shadow, slightly hunched, fingers spread apart, standing in my hallway. I freaked out and turned back the way I came around the corner, thinking I was crazy. I cautiously looked around the corner to check if the shadow was gone, but it remained standing there, observing me. When it noticed me, it cocked its head as if trying to assess my presence or was confused. I thought to myself, nope, not happening, and quickly ran into my room, shut the door, and took 2 minutes to breathe and calm down. Thereafter, I built up the confidence to look again, and it was gone. 2. No one was ringing my doorbell. Another experience I had was something I would have whenever I was alone in the house. It would never happen when my dad was home or anyone else was around, but I think my fear fed it. I would be alone, and at random times, like 3 p.m., midnight, 11 p.m., etc., the doorbell would ring, and no one would be at the door. It once even played the doorbell tune and then played it backwards, and it doesn't play that way. Our doorbell was battery operated and not sensitive to the touch either, you have to press it down tilde. The fact that our speaker for the doorbell was plugged into the wall at the end of the hallway so it would echo throughout the house didn't help tbh. The worst time was when I was watching a movie, and at exactly 11:58 p.m., my doorbell rang. I was terrified, home alone. My stomach dropped, and I grabbed a knife to defend myself just in case anyone was there. I opened the door, and no one is there. My front gate is locked. I feel like I'm going crazy. I feel like someone was watching me inside and outside of my house. I called out and told it to stop and go away. But I couldn't shake the fear, so I ended up calling a friend to come stay with me for a few hours until I had calmed down. A few other things from that house. I no longer live in that house, but I used to hear my dad call my name, and I'd answer him or ask if he'd called me, and he'd say he hadn't. I had someone whisper my name into my ear when I was walking home from the bus stop. Things just used to try to grab my attention when I was a teenager. I've tried to ignore it and block it out because it scares me sometimes. Childhood paranormal experience. So when I was 8 or 9 years old, I lived in a home diagonal from an elderly couple. We kids referred to her as the witch, which was not meant in a cruel way. She was not intimidating, but she practiced tarot card reading and hosted gatherings of unusual individuals. I come from a family of horror lovers. From probably too young age, my father introduced my brothers and me to 70s/80s horror movies, much to my mother's dismay. The Exorcist, Evil Dead, Communion, Puppet Masters, and Killer Clowns are the movies I grew up on. If you asked me as a child what I wanted to be when I was older, I'd reply a forensic pathologist for the FBI like Dana Scully. My love of the paranormal led inevitably to my love of space. Watch fire in the sky and then tell me you don't believe, my father and I would sit on our porch looking at stars. One summer night when we were outside, a bright blue light caught my attention from the neighbor's house diagonal from ours. I look up, and in the second-story window on the right-hand side of the house, I see my neighbor's husband, and there is this incredible bright blue light behind him. He had both arms up at 90-degree angles, so his forearms were framing his head on either side. Then he began to move quickly side to side. It was almost like he was vibrating. I said to my dad, "Look, there's Rocky," pointing to the window. My father looked where I was pointing, froze for maybe 10 seconds, then quickly scooped me up and brought me inside. My mom could tell my dad was upset. My dad yelled at me to go to bed so he could talk to my mom. I went upstairs and cried because I was confused by what happened. I was a daddy's girl and didn't understand how I made him upset. The next morning I wake up, and my mom and dad come talk to me in my room. My mom sat next to me and said, paraphrasing, about last night. "We didn't tell you guys because we would rather not upset you, but Rocky passed away 2 weeks ago." I was dumbfounded. My dad sat quietly, nodding his head as I protested about what happened the night before. I honestly can't remember if he mentioned it when he saw him. I don't remember anything beyond being told the man I'd seen was dead. I think it was such a shock I blocked the rest of the conversation. Fast forward 20 years, and we're at a big family dinner celebrating my engagement. The condo steers inevitably to paranormal topics as my family tells my fiancé about my creepy obsessions as a kid. At one point my father says, ghosts aren't real." In shock I ask him, "But what about Rocky?" Both my parents' mouths drop open. My mom exclaimed that she couldn't believe I remembered, while I continued to stare at my dad. I asked him again, and he admitted that he saw him too. I have never shared this story for any specific reason, but I believe it marks the beginning of my experiences with the paranormal. Before my mom married my stepdad, she worked full-time, so I, 6 years old then, stayed with family or friends of the family while she was working. I remember I was supposed to stay with this older couple who were friends of my great aunt, and they were nice, but something about the property around their house made me feel off. It was still quite early, as my mother needed to be at work by 7 o'clock. We arrived just before dawn. Fog was thick, making everything naturally feel eerie. The old man was still sleeping, but the little old lady greeted us nicely. I felt safe and happy around her. She was a very sweet lady. Once my mom left, I asked the lady if I could go play outside. Saying yes, I put my jacket on, and she stayed inside while I went to explore their yard. The house was a decent distance from the road, so the driveway was long, and it was lined with cherry blossom trees. I loved the way the little flowers would fall around like the trees, like confetti. It was early spring, so they were in bloom. I remember being in the middle of the row of trees while the wind picked up, blowing the petals all around. There were so many it was almost as if they created a wall lining the edge of the tree line. Something caught my eye between the flowers falling just on the other side of the wall of blooms. I dismissed it as my eyes playing tricks on me due to the haze of flower petals. The only way I know how to describe it is as if a white flare from a polarized picture was blurred. It was quick as a flash, though. I didn't think anything of it until I kept seeing it skirt around right behind the trees. I didn't feel fear but a sad kind of happiness laced with curiosity. The blur came in a few shapes and sizes, so I couldn't make out if it was a child or adult, and it didn't give off either energy. I just felt it wasn't trying to harm me yet. I stood in the driveway, almost playing with it, as it seemed to want to stay just out of direct vision. It wasn't until I was squinting, immersed in trying to figure out and wrap my mind around what I was seeing, that I felt a tap sharply on my shoulder. I still feel it as I write this. I hear the words, "You need to run," in a deep voice that drained the blood from my entire body for what felt like an eternity. I bolted to the house and watched the blooms fall the rest of my day from the kitchen until my mom came to pick me up. I am sharing my 3 paranormal experiences from my teenage years. I have 3 stories to share. For context, I grew up in the hillbilly South, in an area that was a Civil War battleground and was known for its significant paranormal activity. I also grew up in the country in an area with many woods around, So you can imagine that nighttime was pretty spooky. 1. When I was around 14, my parents got divorced. My dad had an affair and married the woman he had it with. A couple of years later, his new wife passed away, and when she passed, he told me he would rather not sleep in there, my parents, his, and my stepmom's, old bedrooms. So he took my room, and I took my parents' old bedroom. One night I was getting ready for bed, and I went to close the bathroom door. The bathroom was attached to the bedroom, and there was one way in and one way out. I closed the bathroom door, turned off the lights, and got in bed. I closed my eyes only to hear knocking from inside the bathroom door. At first, I assumed something fell, but then the knocking got more persistent and fast. It felt like there was someone inside the bathroom knocking to get out. I've never run so fast to my sister's room. I asked her if I could sleep with her, and we cried because we were both scared. 2. This is when I was around 14. This was before I switched rooms with my dad. I had joined the girls' soccer team at my school. During that summer we would stay at each other's houses and have sleepovers. This specific night I was at another friend's house and didn't go. My sister was on the volleyball team at her school and had early morning practice the next day, and my dad goes to bed at like 7 because he is a dialysis nurse and works really early shifts. So even on the days he's not working, he still goes to bed early. This will tie into the story later. When I woke up at my friend's house the next morning, I got a text from some of the soccer girls. They said, "Did Katie lose her phone in your yard? Will you go out and check if it's there?" I had no idea what they were talking about, so I called them. Apparently that night at around midnight they went and rolled my house as a prank. When they got to my house, they saw the lights in my bedroom were on, and two figures, my sister's height and mine, were in the room pacing back and forth. Suddenly the figures turned their heads as if to look out the window at the soccer girls rolling my house. I was a little in shock at first because I was not home that night. When I got back to my house, I asked my sister if she had a friend over last night, and she said no, she went to bed at 8 because she had early morning volleyball practice. I asked my dad if he had been in my room or had anyone over, and he said no, he went to bed at his usual time. To this day, I remain uncertain about what that was or what they perceived, but I am now 26 years old and still cannot enter that room without experiencing a chill. 3. To this day, this story remains the one that unsettles me the most. I was about 15 when this one happened. It was an ordinary day. One of my friends dropped me off at my father's residence following soccer practice. He wasn't home, and I was waiting for my mom to come pick me up to stay with her and my stepdad for a few days. I was there alone for a couple of hours while she was still at work, and I remember exactly what I was doing and watching. I was eating chips in the living room on the couch watching America's Next Top Model. The sun was setting, and it was getting dark outside. The sun had finally set, and about 10 minutes later I had this dreadful feeling inside. It was a feeling like someone or something was watching me. I tried to ignore it at first, but the feeling persisted. Finally I turned my head to look out the window, and I saw a face. It wasn't a normal face, it was human but also not. The one distinct thing about this face that to this day I will never forget is the big yellow cat-like eyes that were staring at me. It wasn't a cat, though. It had a human nose and mouth but yellow cat eyes. I froze when I saw it and didn't take my eyes away. I was scared that if I looked away, it would disappear, and I would be more afraid of not knowing where it was. I just stared and pulled out my phone and called my mom to ask if she was almost done. She told me she was 1 minute down the road. I asked her if she would come inside and get me when she got there. When her headlights came up the driveway, the face disappeared. I still cannot explain it rationally to this day. The child speaks about a ghost. Okay, so this probably sounds dumb, and I don't have much evidence, but I need advice on how to handle this. I am brand new to this group. We live in a house that was built in the 1960s that is out in the sticks. I have always felt a certain way about areas of my house and property, like I was not alone or something was off, but only in certain areas and never in a menacing way. I've seen blue orbs in pictures at our house, but I never thought much about it. My son is 5 now, he has a speech delay, so I don't know how long he's known /thought /imagined, whatever, about this, but ever since he was 3, he has insisted that there is a ghost in one particular room. Will not drop it, brings it up about once a month. The room used to be his, but now it's his sister's. I bought a pink Himalayan salt night light for his sister's room recently because we were redecorating it. When my son saw the night light, he got super excited about it and said it needed to go in his sister's room right now. He unpacked it and would not stop talking about it until it was plugged in. He says the night light keeps the ghost away because of the rock on it and wants it to be on 24/7. I have no idea where he got that information. When I ask him how and why he believes it, as well as where he heard it, he responds that he doesn't know, he just thinks it makes the ghost go away. Do I have a child spirit in my house? I'm a respectful rationalist, not on the paranormal plane. For example, I've not witnessed or felt spirits where other people in the same room at the same time have, but I'm thinking my house might have a spirit present, perhaps one that has attached to my child? I, 32 female, rent an old house and have lived here since July 2024, just me and my 2 kids, Robert Robertson, 2 male, and Riley Robertson, 3 girl. 4 weeks, to the day, after we moved in, 3-year-old daughter, Riley, jumps into bed with me when she wakes up at 5:30 a.m. Because it's early, we're cuddling in bed and I'm dozing, and she whispers, "Kill her. Kill her." I don't react as I try to put aside this odd behavior as something she's heard at daycare or on Kids Eat. I'm sleepy and trying to rationalize. Then, she says in her normal voice, "Riley Robertson is dead." I open my eyes to look at her, and she's just looking at me, deadpan. I am freaked out. I try to see what color her eyes are, as my first concern is that they're black and she's possessed. I couldn't tell in the darkness of the room. I responded that, "My dear, we don't say things like that about ourselves." I maybe should have asked questions but didn't want to invite the spirit. I honestly had no idea how to respond, and the moment passed. We've lived here for 10 months now, and nothing else really unusual has happened since. Both kids say they've seen ghosts in the house, but the ghosts are just over there or sitting in a chair, not doing anything, and the kids enjoy watching spooky cartoons about ghosts/Halloween, so I chalk it up to that. I've had times where I'm sleeping and a child has rushed up to my bed, as if in fast motion, and it's jolted me awake, but this could be my subconscious about this situation. I've not been bothered by all of this and put it out of my mind except to tell friends/family the creepy story about what Riley said that morning. Then the other night when I was alone in the house, Riley's iPad, which was across the room, just started playing Kids Eat. I was again a little spooked but didn't feel a presence, and it could be nothing? I read briefly that a child's spirit may not be cleansed by smudging/saging a house, that it could actually cause it to become worse if the spirit is demonic. My fear in this situation. Childhood experience. I always had this one stuffed animal growing up. I carried that stuffed dog everywhere I went. He was my best friend, and I called him Doggy. I don't remember my exact age at the time, but it was when my stuffed animal transitioned from being something I carried with me to becoming more of a sleep buddy, although I still had a huge attachment to it. Anyways, it was one summer night, and I remember Mom making me go to bed. I would do my routine of brushing my teeth, turning on the nightlight, and tucking Doggy in beside me. The nightlight was one of those sweet 2000s rotating fish tank lamps. Anyways, after a while I'm still awake alone in bed just watching those fish go around and around. At one point I remember starting to feel scared, like the energy of the room just dramatically shifted. Trying to distract myself by contentedly studying the fish and counting every time the clownfish circles back. Suddenly, it turned off, prompting me to quickly get up and turn it back on as fast as possible. I sit up and then instantly get pulled back down. Suddenly, it felt as if a massive weight was restraining my body. I was unable to move anything. Lying there motionless, I noticed my stuffed animal slowly rise vertically from the bed. I become absolutely mortified as I see him pause halfway up and slowly transcend into the walls. As Doggy was passing inside, the wall had almost a ripple-like effect to it. I can't fully explain it, but stray visions of things like crimson, orange, and metallic. It was all such an intense feeling of sadness and terror as I thought I would never see Doggy again. After that, he was legit gone. I got up panicking, trying to search for him and still unsure of what actually happened. I ended up crying myself to sleep because of the situation. In the morning I ran downstairs to tell my mother and saw Doggy on the counter. My mom was pissed because she thought I used her razor blades to shave the stuffed animal. Doggy only had small patches of fur left and looked almost completely shaved. More like all the little fur he had was plucked out. I tried to explain what happened, but it was exactly like a movie trope where the parent is completely dismissive of the kid seeing something freaky. She decided I was too old for it, or I crossed a boundary and hid him away from me. Devastated. Again. A few days later I get this massive pain in my abdomen, and it's actually unbearable. It gets to a point my mom takes me to the doctor, which is kind of a big deal to go see a doctor for my family. I end up getting an X-ray, and they find massive clumps of fur in my stomach. I don't remember what the doctor said, but my mom said they found a bunch of fur in my stomach, and that was causing my pain. I was fine, but my mom thought I was actually binge eating fur off my stuffed animals and took all of them away. I felt so wrong for that, and I'm, still, upset about what happened to Doggy and me getting punished for it. I had to switch rooms and slept with my older brother instead because I couldn't actually get any sleep without another person in the room. I tell this story all the time now. I still can't fully comprehend or express it in words that make sense. Well, it is not something they said because the baby was too small to speak, but one of my relatives knew a person who owed them a lot, and that person died, and somehow, don't ask, shady, his huge house got to be in the possession of my relative. I went over once for a tea, and I was shocked. The house was huge, it had like 3 to 4 bedrooms. There was a huge gallery with the rooms, and downstairs an enormous living room, a terrace, and a swimming pool, so yeah, actually beautiful. They had a baby not long ago, and while we were talking and hanging out in the living room, the baby started looking at the top corner and giggling. I was like, hey, cute, she can do that already. And the mom freaked out right away. She, jumped to the baby and turned her around to face the other direction. And now was my shock, the baby turned back as much as she could with her head and continued to giggle and smile in the same direction. For your information, that corner was empty. It was the only corner where there was no gallery, just a plain white wall. So I asked what this was about because now the baby was really acting weird. And they explained how they got the house and that the old owner hanged himself there. Yeah, it didn't take more than a year for them to decide to move out. Childhood experiences. I was raised by my religious grandmother since I was around 8 to 9 years old. My parents are alive, they just weren't able to care for me at that time. In the religion my grandmother follows, there is no such thing as ghosts or an afterlife, and instead they believe anything paranormal is demons or angels. When I first started living with my grandmother, we lived in a large house that was owned by the church we were a part of. I would occasionally feel very uneasy in the bedrooms upstairs and hated being alone up there, so I often slept with my grandmother. I can vaguely remember one night falling asleep on the couch in the living room and waking up to see an old woman sitting in a chair next to the window. She was just looking out the window and was completely white like a ghost. I unfortunately don't know how credible that sighting is since I was sleepy, and even now it doesn't feel real. Once I started sleeping in my room on the first floor, I'd often look out the window while lying in bed, and I could see a shadowy human figure, presumably male, standing across the street under the street lamp. I hated it so much and would often take my pillow and block the view because I felt like they were watching me. I remember looking at the same spot during the day, trying to determine if I was just seeing something that resembled a human at night, but there was nothing there that could explain it. After a while we moved into an in-law apartment that was attached to one of my grandmother's friends' houses. At this house, things have escalated. Oftentimes while playing in my room alone, I would be perfectly fine and then all of a sudden feel an intense fear and like I needed to leave immediately. This happened multiple times, and I never felt truly comfortable in that room. One of the worst things I experienced was once when I was lying in bed at night. I hated the feeling of my hair under my neck, so I would fan it out over my pillow to keep my neck cool. When I did this one night, I felt a tugging like someone was pulling just a little bit of my hair. I quickly moved and looked behind me, but it was just my wall. I laid back down, and it happened again. At this point I moved my hair under my head, and it stopped, but it still scares me to think that whatever it was touching me. I hadn't mentioned any of these experiences to my grandmother because I just didn't want her to think that something was wrong, and I wasn't sure what she'd think. However, I do think she was suspicious since I was clearly uneasy. The final experience I had happened while I was in the shower. I was finishing up and could hear what sounded like static noise coming from my room. When I got out of the shower and went to my room, my grandmother was holding my portable radio, which I had basically never used. Not only was the radio on, but it was on full volume and just blasting static noise. My grandmother turned it off and looked at me, then went to her room and grabbed her mother's Bible. She opened it up to some scripture and set it on my nightstand, and after that everything stopped. Although the additional experiences didn't recur, I still felt uneasy in my room. We moved several more times after that, and every time I was always so afraid that whatever was at the previous homes would follow me, but I have thankfully never experienced anything else. I have no idea what exactly was bothering me, whether it be a demon or a ghost, but I'd love to know others' thoughts. I've spoken to a few non-believers who just mocked me, but I feel like unless you experience these things yourself, it's hard to explain the feelings and sensations that occur. When I tell other believers, they clearly understand the fear and uneasiness I felt. My siblings and other family members have also shared their experiences with me, suggesting a familial connection. Thank you for listening, and you are welcome to try and explain things or give your insight. Childhood paranormal experience. When I was around 5 to 6, my older sister, 9 at the time, had a bicycle without working brakes. We lived on a small hill, and one day, I decided to ride the bike down the hill. I didn't know how to ride a bike, but I somehow made it all the way to the bottom, where I was ejected and slammed headfirst into a rock. From here, things get rocky. I lived with my grandparents at the time, and I remember being in my grandpa's truck and him taking me to the hospital. In the waiting room, there is an older woman, who asked me about my head and assured me that I was going to be okay. She then talked to me about a story of a cat who fell from a window, but I don't recall a lot about this. About a year later, while staying with my mother in her apartment complex, I suddenly felt the urge to use shopping bags as a parachute and leap from the third floor. I'm sure that if I had done it, I would have been injured. I remembered this lady and her story at this time and decided against jumping out of the window. Fast forward a few years, I find out that I was not taken to the hospital, or at least no one recalled me being taken. I still have a scar on my head from the injury, but my family chalks the old woman's story up to hallucination. I was wondering what you guys think of this and what it could have been / the meaning of it, since her story ended up possibly saving me from injury later on. Looking for advice regarding my daughter having potential sightings. She's 2. So my 2-year-old daughter has been voicing odd things. Approximately 6 months ago, she awoke during the night, screaming, and subsequently joined my partner and me in our bed. She's bouncing around playing when she stops, stares at the end of the bed, and then grabs me and says, "Mama, Mama, scared." I asked of what, and she pointed to the end of the bed and said, "Ghost." A couple of days ago, we were playing hide and seek, and I was shouting, "Where's, insert daughter's name?" And she replied, "I'm dead," and then, "She's dead." When I asked who told her that, she said, "The big scary ghost." Forward to yesterday, and we were happily playing in our back garden, kicking balls around, running, and laughing when she suddenly stopped, ran to me, grabbed my hand, and said she wanted to go back inside because she was scared. I ask of what, and she replies, "The big scary ghost." Then when I put her down for her nap, she doesn't want me to go because she's scared again of the big scary ghost and can see it in her room, around the house, and in the garden. I'm open-minded to this stuff, and I've had my own encounters in the past, not in this house. There have been times when we've been in my daughter's room and the door handle has gone down and up and rattled, but there's been nobody in the rest of the house. That's happened a couple of times. Things in the house will just disappear randomly and then, after searching for months high and low, will reappear in the most obvious places that we've checked about 10 times already. My cats are very protective of her at night, lying guard at her bedroom door and attempting to break into her room just to lie next to her bed. They only have this interest in her when she's going to bed at night or for a nap. We've been getting some interference on her baby monitor too recently. I don't know if this is all related. I'm just concerned for my daughter, and I don't really know what to do. I don't want to discount her experiences, and she's 2, so I feel like she shouldn't know what any of this is, so I believe it's genuine. I'm planning on smudging the house tomorrow. Is there any other advice anyone can offer? Is there anything I can do or anything to ease my anxiety? I and my kids saw and heard someone who definitely wasn't there this morning, and I am spooked.
I, a 30-year-old female, had just woken up and was getting ready for the day in our bathroom, which is attached to our bedroom.
If you look through the door, you have a full view of our bed, and my sleeping 5-year-old son. I saw something adult-sized move past the door in the dark bedroom at regular walking speed, so I opened the door a bit and looked out. There was no one there, and my kid was snoring. My husband should have been at work for 2 hours at that point. I checked our security cameras and saw nothing but my husband leaving for work earlier and chalked it up to anxiety and sleep deprivation, as I am heavily pregnant and can't sleep for shit right now. A few minutes later I heard what sounded like an adult man humming, but it only lasted a few seconds. I can't name the tune. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, as we sleep with the box fan on full blast right outside the door, and I had the exhaust fan on at the time. I looked out of the bathroom door again, nothing. Am I going crazy? I took a deep breath and continued washing my face. The door was open about 2 to 3 inches, and the mirror in our tiny bathroom is one that covers most of the wall, from the counter to almost the ceiling. It's big, and you can see everything behind and around you. The door is to my left, right behind me. You could reach in and tap my shoulder. Out of the corner of my eye through the mirror, I suddenly saw something that wasn't there before. There was a hand reaching through the opening of the door, gripping the frame right behind me. It looked like a grown man's hand and was at eye level. I froze, then turned around, half expecting my husband to be playing a prank, because who else would be in here with me? The hand was gone. I even checked through the mirror. Instantly my child screamed, "Mama, ah," and I jerked the door open. Nothing was there but a scared kid with eyes wide open. He wasn't looking at me. Who was that? Who, baby? I was trying not to sound scared. He stared off into space for a few seconds and then seemingly forgot about whatever happened. Mama, why did you say my name? I didn't, baby. Did you hear your name? You said my name real loud, and then you weren't beside me. I was in the bathroom, and I don't think I did, buddy. It sounded like you? I checked the cameras, I checked the windows and doors, every room and closet shaking the whole time. Nothing. I feel safer living in this apartment than I ever have anywhere else. Even alone, and I have bad anxiety. Like I said, if it was only one of us, I would have shrugged it off as sleep deprivation or night terrors, which my kid has never had, or something rational. What did we see and hear? I think I may have had ghost encounters as a child. As a child, I apparently experienced many weird things in our old apartment, and I wanted the community's opinion on it. Now, to be fair, I don't actually remember most of these things, but my mother used to tell me these stories a lot. First, and possibly the strangest, is that I potentially encountered the spirit of my dead grandfather. Apparently, I would have lengthy conversations with an unknown entity that I referred to as the man. My mom wasn't sure what to make of this and just kind of ignored it till it stopped happening. But one time we were going through an old photo album, and when we came across a picture of my dead grandfather, I said, "That's the man." My mom said the pictures I drew made sounds like the wind was moving them, even with the windows closed. My electronic toys often went haywire. I actually remember this vividly. I had a toy for helping me learn simple words by typing them into the keypad. One time this thing randomly started making noise and scared the ever-living crap out of me, and my mother had to get rid of it. I also had one of those talking books, you know, the ones with buttons that you're supposed to press with the story, that randomly started making noises at night, which freaked out my mother, because, you know, of all this other creepy stuff happening, and she got rid of it the next day. I don't know why, but these stories scare me, and I thought you might like them. Thank you for your feedback in advance. My brother saw a ghost as a kid. 2 decades later, I realized what he actually saw. I was about 7 years old, my brother was about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just us three at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left puts you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are window doors we always kept locked and rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened to our back porch. The house leans into a small hill. Both my brother and mom had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. "I'm going to try to pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway." I don't know if my mom wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories to try to scare me or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it, but she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified by it. The fear of seeing a ghost like that at the end of the hallway or through the windows is the reason I started running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was about 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mom blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food we had?" This really caught me by surprise, because in all the years I lived in that house, we never once called the cops, gun owner family in a quiet, rural WV neighborhood, etc. I asked her what she was talking about, and she looked equally surprised, as if she had just revealed something by accident. "Oh, that's right. I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night, I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked, I saw a man staring into my bedroom." She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I provided to them when they arrived, but I described a tall white male wearing a striped shirt and jeans with short dark hair. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in the area. It turns out he had escaped from jail on a murder charge. Now, I know it sounds so obvious hearing those two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago, in my mid-20s, that I pieced together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casing our home. Old people in old houses. 2 paranormal encounters. The first one was told to me by an old friend. Let's call him Buddy. Buddy is an electrician that works all over Georgia. He is used to working on wiring people's houses and fixing electric problems and all that. He told me about this one incident that bugged him, and he's never forgotten about it. Buddy is no stranger to old houses that are bought from the bank or realty company, and the new owners end up fixing things in the house just to flip it for a higher price. This one house he was called in to work on was a relatively old house. He said it may have been built in the 1890s or around that time. Georgia is known for old, beautiful southern houses, so it's not anything new. He said he went to the house as scheduled. The house was really old school, old creaky wood floors, antique furniture, etc. In the living room he saw an elder gentleman in a bathrobe sitting in a rocking chair, looking out the window, so he said hi to the man. The old man didn't turn around or say anything, so Buddy assumed he was deaf or senile and just ignored it and went about his business. He met the owners of the house while he was about to go into the attic. They were this younger couple. Really nice people, Buddy said. Buddy told me he chatted with the couple a little bit. Got them to sign some paperwork regarding the work he just did. Before he left, out of sheer curiosity, he asked about the elderly gentleman in the rocking chair. After he asked the question, the young couple had the weirdest WTF look on their faces and asked him where he saw him, what did he look like, etc. Buddy didn't pay too much attention to the old man at the time, so he just told them the old man had a bathrobe on and was sitting in the rocking chair. The young couple then asked Buddy to show them where he saw the man. Buddy led them to the living room. There was the rocking chair. Still in front of the window. No, old man. The couple believed that Buddy was insane, as one might expect. Buddy was slightly freaked out but shrugged and left and didn't think much of it for a while. A few months later, Buddy was at his desk at work, spending the day handling paperwork. He received a call from the husband of the young couple. Apparently, the husband did some research on their old house and read that an old man owned it a few decades ago. He had no family and died in that rocking chair. Needless to say, Buddy was scared shitless after that. He didn't even believe in ghosts, but he did after this encounter. Second incident, it's my personal experience. My husband grew up in Stockbridge, Georgia. His childhood home was built during the Civil War, and it was renovated and rebuilt and added on through the ages. We are all aware that the house possesses a significant history, but I never paid much attention to it. Hubby told me he had nightmares when he was a child sleeping in that house, nightmares of Civil War soldiers running through his bedroom, bloodied. Following our engagement, hubby and I made the decision to visit his mom, who was still residing in the same house. After eating mom-cooked fried chicken and drinking some wine, it was late, and his mom told us to stay over so we wouldn't have to drive back to the city. I slept on the couch while hubby slept on the ottoman next to the couch. His mom slept in her bedroom. Someone touched my leg at around 3:15 a.m., waking me up. I thought it was my hubby, so I ignored it. The touching persisted. I woke up and was about to beat him out for waking me up and then saw that he was dead asleep on the ottoman. There was just no way he was touching me. So I thought it was my mother-in-law trying to wake me up. So I walked down the hall and saw her bedroom door was locked, and I could hear her snoring. I was kind of freaked out and didn't think much of it. I went back to sleep, and we woke up early in the morning, ready to head back to the city. After I and hubby said goodbye to his mom, we got in our car. I looked at the kitchen window of the house, which was facing our car, and saw a fat lady dressed in what appeared to be a red polka dot dress. I blinked a few times, thinking it was hubby's mom. But looking closer, it was definitely not her. Then the fat lady waved at me. Through the window. I tugged hubby's arm and told him to look, but he says he didn't see anything. Recalling the experience I had the night before about someone touching my leg, I was freaked out and didn't want to think about it anymore. It wasn't until months later that I brought up the lady I saw to hubby's mom at a family gathering. She looked at me and asked me seriously if I saw her. I told her everything that I experienced at her house that night. Then hubby's mom told me, dead serious, that the lady is a ghost she frequently sees. But when she sees the lady, she is always sitting by her bedside at 3:15 a.m. in the morning. Luckily, those are the only two paranormal encounters I know of / trust in. Hubby and I later did some research about his childhood house and discovered it used to be part of a ghost tour. Scary childhood experience. After watching a show about the paranormal recently, I was reminded again of a childhood experience that I can't explain and that made me absolutely terrified, almost to the point of a phobia, of dogs. I want to clarify 2 points. 1. We did not own a dog at that time, and 2. I mentioned this to my mom not too long ago, and she said she remembers this night too and that I wasn't dreaming when I ran downstairs to her. I always thought that maybe I was making it up, but when she said she remembered it too, I kind of had to believe it then. Anyway, I can't remember how old I was, maybe 3 or 4, as my little sister was still a newborn baby at the time. I used to hate going to bed at night. In fact, I hated nighttime in general. I would see things around the house in the shadows mostly. I think they were dogs, or animals at least, and I remember them growling at me if I came too close. I specifically remember one of them under the dining room table, and I ran to my mom screaming. The fear was so strong. One night I was in bed and lying on my left side. I remember this clearly, as when I opened my eyes, I could see the door in the distance. After lying there for a while, I felt what I can only describe as paws walking up my side, which sounds impossible, and I completely agree, but that's what I felt, followed by something sitting on my hip bone. I opened my eyes, and directly in front of me was a dog. It looked like a long-eared spaniel-type dog, and as gross as it sounds, I also remember that it opened its mouth and had vomit on its tongue. I remember feeling terrified as I turned away from that and looked up at the thing sitting on my hip. It was a black dog with a thin body and sleek fur, like a greyhound, and it had a pointed face and pointed ears that pointed upwards over its head. Its eyes stood out, but I can't remember any color. I quickly looked to my right, and there was a Jack Russell/Terrier type dog there that started growling when it knew I could see it. I remember being frozen in fear as I looked up at the black dog and watched its head turn slowly and then suddenly snap to look at me. At that point I somehow got out of bed and ran to the top of the stairs. I'm pretty sure there was a baby gate there at the time, so I have no idea how I got past it, but I remember looking back into my room and seeing all 3 dogs turn to look at me before beginning to run towards me. I got down the stairs and burst into the living room where my parents and baby sister were. The dogs didn't follow as far as I knew, and I remember my mom asking me what I was doing. I very clearly remember saying, I wanted to see sister's name. I'm not sure why I didn't inform them about what had happened, but my mom remained silent and didn't force me to return to bed. Instead, she allowed me to lie on the sofa with her and hold the baby. After that incident, I never had another experience like it, but I was absolutely terrified of dogs until I was about 9 or 10 years old. Like I said, my mom remembers me coming into the living room and saying something about the dream a while later. I've often spoken about it when the paranormal comes up, but never tried to look into it until recently. I can't find anything that really matches my experience, and I can't uncover any history on the house I used to live in, which is a shame. But after we moved house, I never saw any shadow dogs again. It was an interesting experience all the same, so I thought I'd share, but if anyone has had any experiences with anything like this, I'd love to hear about it. My experiences growing up in an extremely haunted funeral home as a child. I'm 35 years old, and I grew up in Kentucky. Starting when I was about 5, my parents bought a funeral home. It was well over 100 years old when they bought it. They owned and ran the funeral home, and it was pretty large in my area. We lived in the upstairs area of the funeral home. They still own and operate the funeral home to this day, and I visit pretty regularly and occasionally have experiences. I had a fascinating childhood growing up. This is going to be a long read. As a child I had many experiences every day all the way up until I moved out at 19. Some were terrifying, and some were comforting. We had many resident spirits that just stayed around. Some were human, some weren't human. Each had its personality and temperament. I still have experiences to this day when I go visit my parents. The first experience I remember was when I was about 6 years old. I was sitting on the couch in one of the viewing rooms, and I got the feeling of being watched. I looked up and saw a woman standing in the corner of the room. She was a young woman in her mid-20s. She was wearing a black dress, she was very pale, and she had long red hair. She smiled and waved at me, then said, "Hello, little girl." I said hello back, and she smiled again and then disappeared. She would become known as Alice, the most extroverted and nice of the resident spirits in the funeral home. She was very talkative. I formed a very good relationship with her. She pretty much became like a second mother to me. She embodied the matriarchal spirit of the funeral home. Here's a summary of my experiences with her. 1. I would observe her nearly every day, often positioned in corners or standing centrally within a room. 2. She was always smiling, and she always said hello. When I would get off the bus from school, she would always be standing there when I would walk in the door to greet me. She would smile and say hello, and then she would ask how my day was. I would say hello and tell her about my day, and then she would disappear. 3. One time in high school I snuck out to go to a party, and she appeared to my mother in her bedroom and told on me. My mother was waiting up for me in the kitchen when I returned. 4. She protected me from one of the darker non-human spirits that hung out in the embalming room. The first time I wandered into the embalming room right after we moved in, I saw a spirit that definitely didn't seem human. It looked like a young girl that was wearing a gray t-shirt and black pants. Its skin was like scales, it was very reptilian looking. It had a forked tongue like a snake and red eyes. The first time I saw it was when I wandered into the embalming room while exploring shortly after we moved in. I heard a loud growl and looked up, and it was just standing there staring at me. I was paralyzed with fear. Then Alice appeared. It looked at her and kind of leaned its head to the side like a dog that's curious about something. She told it to leave me alone, and it growled and took a step towards me. Alice then stepped in front of me, and this reptilian thing then looked absolutely terrified. Then Alice stuck her arm out, and this thing started to levitate and was choking. It looked like the Darth Vader choke. Alice then moved her arm to the side, and it flew into the wall and disappeared. After that, Alice turned around, got on her knees in front of me, and told me to be more careful, then disappeared. I don't know if Alice is human, but I'm not sure you guys can tell me what you think. She is seemingly very powerful. I will now summarize my experiences with the reptilian spirit. 1. The experience with Alice protecting me. 2. One time I saw it in one of the hallways, and it climbed the wall onto the ceiling and just stared at me and growled before disappearing. 3. I saw it every time I walked in or passed the embalming room, it would just stand there and stare. It never tried to attack me. I think it was because Alice scared it to death. Now, let me discuss the spirit we referred to as the Gray Man. We would see him in the chapel. He was tall and was wearing a gray suit and black tie. Most of the time he just stood there, sometimes he would wave. He was an older man. He never really bothered anybody, he typically just kept to himself. He was quite protective over the organ in the chapel, maybe that's what he was attached to. There was a spirit of a little girl that hung out in the living room. She wore a pink dress and had long blonde hair. Usually, you would hear laughter, then, the little girl would appear in front of you, run away, and disappear. Then there was the spirit we called the General. He was a young man who wore what looked like a military dress uniform from possibly the Civil War. He never really said anything to us, but he was always polite and would tip his hat when we saw him. There was an elderly couple that we would sometimes see standing side by side. They were dressed in Victorian-style clothes. That's just some of the experiences that my family and I have had. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments. Also, feel free to message me. I had paranormal encounters as a child. Were these things just negative spirits or something more sinister? As a 33-year-old female, I remember being unbelievably frightened of going to sleep in my room throughout my childhood. I would lie there in the dark and have this intense fear that there was something waiting in the dark at the end of my room, not that I could see anything to begin with, but it was just this intense realization of not being alone in the room. From an early age I found that the more fear I felt, the more I would sense something bad in the room, and the more noises I would hear, so I understood that my fear drew them/it to me more intensely. Sometimes when this happened, I would see what looked like a very fast-moving shape, and I could hear very, very faint sounds that sounded like the cracking of surfaces when they expand. One night I heard distinct knocking on the bedside table next to me, very, very clearly. The bedside table was jammed up against the bed, and this knocking I could hear was clearly coming from under the bed. This frightened me so badly I ran downstairs to my parents crying. When I was around 8 years old, I started seeing black shadow people and cats that I could see in my far periphery. They moved so fast and always in the corner of my eye. I only saw one full-bodied apparition. As I rounded the top of the stairs one night, I saw a flash in my vision of a man with a long coat, a cane, and a tall top hat. This appeared like when you quickly glance at a bright light, and when you blink, you get that flash image in your eyes. I didn't see a face, just a faded outline. One particular incident that frightened me, one night I had my budgie in my room, and our cat was sleeping at the foot of my bed. Now I used to always sleep facing the wall with the doona pulled around my face, because it felt like I could protect myself like this. And like usual, I felt these bad sensations in the room, and as I turned away from the wall to lie on my back, this smoky shape moved over my head. It looked like a bird-shaped thing, and as it moved over my head, it appeared like a shape moving through thick smoke, as if it was made of smoke. Immediately after this happened, the cat jumped off the bed, and the budgie went crazy in the cage, like it was flying madly and making panicky noises. After this happened I began to see less and less of the shadowy, fast-moving people. I began sleeping better and consequently becoming less and less scared, which helped to keep them away, thankfully. However, even to this day, if I get myself worked up and frightened before I sleep, I can feel like I'm sinking into this vulnerable state where I'm opening myself up to having something paranormal happen. Nothing happened for 15 or so years, and now at 33 years old I thought it was all in the past. However, on my first night residing in the new apartment, I was lying there when I heard a loud whisper directly next to my ear that said, "Hey!" And my adrenaline shot up, and my heart was racing, and I didn't sleep for hours afterwards. Are the things that happened to me over the years all undeniably negative? The things in my room did feel like they wanted to either hurt or scare me in some way. I've always been curious, were these spirits that tormented me human or something demonic or otherworldly? Why were they drawn to me, and why did my fear seem to give them strength? Why are children more sensitive to the paranormal? Before I start, I just want to apologize if this is labeled incorrectly. This felt like a discussion and a mix of my experiences. But I'm curious as to why children are more perceptive to the paranormal than adults or adolescents, and I'm looking for explanations or thoughts. I've had several encounters with spirits in my life, when I was roughly 3, 5, and 12 years of age. Although there's been other times where things have happened or I've thought I'd seen something out of the corner of my eye, these 3 are the most tangible. I'm 18 now, and other than periodic sleep paralysis, these are the only main things of note, which all occurred before I was a teenager. I'll keep the explanations of each incident brief. It's important to note that my family are renters, and each incident occurred in a different house. When I was 3, my parents told me I came into their room one night, as little kids do when they've had a nightmare or can't sleep. What they said, though, was I told them that the little boy in my room was crying and I didn't want to be in there anymore. So I slept in their room for the next couple nights, and my mom burned sage, and nothing else happened in that house. A couple of years later we lived in a different house, which was much smaller. My room wasn't that big, so we had to fit my dresser in my closet. One morning in the spring of 2006 when I was getting ready for school, I opened up the doors of my closet, and a figure rushed out and above me. It was a hooded figure, with no face or any discernible features aside from his hood. It felt like he rushed through me and up to the ceiling. Again, we burned sage in the house, and that was the last incident. At 12, I was playing Minecraft in my living room one afternoon. Our house had an open concept design, with an open staircase connecting the upper floor to the main room. For whatever reason, at the moment I chose to look up from my laptop, I saw a woman in white. She was in a large dress, almost Victorian in style, and she seemed to float down the stairs, not walk. Her figure quickly disappeared when it reached the bottom of the staircase. These 3 occasions make me wonder if there's a reason why children perceive spirits more often than adults, and I want to hear your paranormal stories from your childhood. Unexplained child presence. Hi everyone, last year I had a paranormal encounter that still confuses me to this day. So back in June last year, 2019, I was asleep. I then woke up to look down and see a young child, probably about 5 or 6, maybe younger, lying next to me clutching onto my side. I woke up to myself stroking his soft hair. I strongly feel this was a little boy. The hair wasn't the reason for why I thought it was a little boy. This child had shortish light blonde hair. At the time I didn't even question it. Even though I could feel myself holding onto this child and stroking his hair as if I was just hugging a child to comfort him or her as I slept, I peacefully went back to sleep with no questions or panic at all in my system. When I woke up, I began to question who this child could be. Could this child be someone I know well? I wrote something similar in another paranormal group a few days ago, and a lovely person tried to channel in to see if they could find anything, but unfortunately they couldn't. I wonder if anyone else could somehow help me find some answers. Thank you. An experience I had as a child. Were these ghosts, and was there something more malicious about this place? The house that appears in my dreams. Ghosts? Or something more malicious, too? I want to set the tone for this. I was merely 6 years old, but I can remember these events as clear as day. My hometown was hit by a very bad tornado that I was in the apex of. It was right over our homes and tore off the neighbor's roof. The sound of a steam engine chugging in my ears as it hovered right above us and my mom praying to God was not something a child my age could easily forget. But neither could anyone forget the drive through the storm to the safety of a relative. We were lucky enough to drive to the home of a relative that night. The storm wreaked its havoc everywhere. The storm nearly destroyed the playground and park where I used to play. A neighbor's boat was flung and had crushed our fences. A man tragically lost his life when the gas lines broke, causing his house to explode. We had to evacuate with the fear that everything would suddenly go down in flames at any moment. But flash forward to about a week later. I was in the back of my stepfather's Tahoe. He was at work using his brother's car, as my mother's car was completely destroyed during the storm. We go to look at houses. Up on the hill overlooking the river, but not able to see the river as it was clouded by trees, was this old fixer-upper of a home. It was midday. The sun was out, and the road was fairly quiet. Mom had heated some dino nuggets for me in a Tupperware container and kept them in a lunchbox to preserve their warmth. They were a bit lukewarm by the time I had opened them up in the car to have started eating them, especially after we stopped by a local Exxon gas station to get food. I, of course, begged my mother into getting my ODHD self my most recent food obsession. Funyuns. With my small bag of Funyuns opened in the back seat, my mother ascended the hill of the house. It was a wooden lake house style home, fairly big with 2 stories with a disconnected garage. It was surrounded by trees that were downed by the storm that was a week ago at this point. However, the house appeared to have incurred damage beyond the storm's impact. My mother drove up in my stepfather's Tahoe. Though I was only 6 years old, I immediately noticed the house was in ruins. To this day, I vividly remember the large hole on the left side of the roof, a gap extending down through the second story of the building and into the first. Mom parked on the outside and told me that she was going to go and look at the house and see how much fixing up could be done, or to demolish the house on the lot to get a new one. She told me that I could come in and explore, as I love to explore around. Mom walked in ahead of me, and so I grabbed my little sippy cup and stuffed rabbit. But something strange happened the minute I opened the car door. It felt like time froze. The area had this eerie stillness to it. The ground was littered with leaves, as this happened in the autumn, but not a single leaf fell from any tree. It seemed that there were no animals around, and all sounds abruptly ceased. The silence was deafening as I stepped 2 of my little feet onto the grass. I can't describe what gripped me. But initially, I felt a sense of wrongness. Something here was just wrong, not right. I wanted to step forward to explore, but it felt like my feet just wouldn't move. It was cold. But not a kind of cold that comes naturally in the wind. It was a dead stillness that just hit me. I started to cry, something I never did that young. I just didn't know what to do. It felt so wrong, and I just wanted out of there. It felt like something wanted me gone, that something terrible happened here. I began to sob as I felt these feelings. An overwhelming amount of grief and despair hit me, like, whatever happened here, whoever it was would never be happy again. I was getting worried about my mother's safety, so I slowly staggered across the leaves. But as I slowly walked, 1 foot in front of the other, everything just started feeling more and more wrong, just not right. I had rounded the back corner of the house to notice a murky swimming pool of pitch black water. At this point my body physically wouldn't let me take any more steps forward, and I started to cry and bawl, turning around and making a breakaway from the house. While I was crying, I noticed a woman standing nearby. A woman in white and blue. She was wearing a long dress and strode over from the direction my mom went in. But she wasn't my mother. My mother wasn't wearing a gown. She saw I was crying, and I felt myself pulled against her. She asked me what was wrong, and I merely said, "Something is wrong with that house. I want to go home." I remember hearing gentle shushing in my ears as she hugged me, and I accepted her embrace. She asked me where my mother was. And I told her, "She's looking around the house." I started to get concerned and tried to pull away from the woman, and I tugged on the hem of her gown, which seemed to be a basic evening gown. I told her, "I need to go get mommy." But she leaned down in front of me and said, "Sweetie, you can't go in there. It's not safe. You wait here. My daughter will keep you company. You can play with her." I listened to her and started to get back into the backseat. However, I was usually too short to climb back into the Tahoe on my own. But as I climbed, I felt something pushing my butt back into it. I don't know how, but I was back in the seat, and beside me was a little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. She seemed to be wearing a little skirt and a ruffled top. I, being a soft, sensitive boy, offered to play with her. And so I played to get my mind off of the house. Eventually my mom came running back when she heard my cries, and I begged her to leave this house and told her that we can't be here. My mother didn't understand but wanted to calm my fear and decided that this house wasn't worth it. She told me she'd take me back home. I asked her, "What about my new friend?" My mother looked confused as to what I was talking about, but then I gestured to the back seat. The girl was gone. But the seat belt was still buckled. I still have dreams of this house from time to time. I always want to go inside and explore it. However, the woman always grabs me by the waist and pulls me back to the car. So, did I see a ghost? And why did she not want me to enter the house? Does anyone have any rational explanations for the paranormal experiences I had as a child? I must have been between the ages of about 5 and 8 when these things happened. First experience, I woke up through the night, sat up in my bed, looked to my left, and saw a large shadow figure, about 6 or 7 feet tall, standing in my doorway, watching me. I began screaming out of fear, and the shadow copied me. Then I began to cry my eyes out, and the shadow did the exact same. This is when the shadow began to run from my doorway and down the stairs of my house, out of sight. At the exact moment that the shadow was no longer in sight, my mom came running out of my room to see that I was okay. It was such a seamless transition from the shadow running away to my mom walking out of her room and along the hall to check on me. My bedroom looks down the hallway, so I was able to see the shadow begin to run down the stairs, followed by my mom leaving her room. It's still fresh in my mind all these years later, and there was hardly even a slight gap in time between the shadow disappearing and my mom leaving her bedroom. Second experience, this one is a little more surreal, but it didn't duck me up as much as the first experience. I woke up during the night to see a shadow figure in the corner of my room. I remember that it threw a long snake teddy, stuffed toy, at me from the corner that it was standing in, and suddenly there was a puff of purple smoke and the shadow suddenly vanished. I wouldn't put it down to sleep paralysis seeing as I could still move around / scream out in fear. It also wasn't a dream, seeing as my mom actually came hurrying through to check on me at the time, while I had tears streaming down my face. What makes it all the more confusing is the fact that the figure threw a teddy at me from across the room. I remember the exact teddy, a life-size snake that was always kept at the other side of my room, seeing as it was much too long to share a bed with. As I mentioned, the second experience did not have as profound an impact on me as the first, despite its highly surreal nature. The first experience was terrifying, though. I'm pretty confident that I'll always remember the terror I felt as this 6/7 of a foot shadow began screaming and crying so hard that it was almost as if it was in agony. Scary shit for a wee kid. My children and I have had some strange experiences. One, a negative entity seemed to attach itself to me while we lived in the old house. I always sensed an unsettling presence, but this was my first true paranormal experience. I was 16 to 17 at the time, and we moved into an old, run-down house. I hated one section of the house, included 2 bedrooms and a hallway, from the second I stepped foot in there. One of those bedrooms ended up being my room. I absolutely hated that house. I constantly felt this presence that was so heavy, loud, and dark, but not in the way that we typically feel / hear / see. That's the best way I can describe it. It was almost like a physical thing that would follow me around. Like I was aware of where it was at any given time. I could feel it coming, and it would fill me with dread. I was terrified. I would try to go to sleep at night, and I could feel it moving towards me. It felt like it was crushing me, and it was so dense and loud. I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis every night. I would often just be sitting on the lounge, and I could feel it coming towards me. I felt like I was being preyed on. It would happen constantly, so I would stay at my nan and pa's house a lot, but it literally never happened to me unless I was in that house. 2. My daughter's experience in another rundown house. Different house. My twins were around 3 years old at the time. They would talk about the man who supposedly sat in the sunroom and lived in the wall. They'd point to one section of wall in the hallway. They said he was nice and protected them from the girl. The girl freaked them out. Like they would sprint back into the lounge room and say they couldn't go anywhere because the girl was there. They described a little girl around 5 years old who had white skin, black hair, black eyes, cuts on her skin, wore undies, and would hiss at them with an angry face if they looked at her. The girl supposedly lived in my sister's cupboard. They were too young to work it out at the time, but the back of my sister's cupboard was the same as the wall in the hallway where the man lived. They said, heaps of people live in there. We tried but couldn't find out much info about that house. 3. The Top Hat Man. A few years later, we moved to another old house that was different from the previous one. We had not experienced anything unusual in that house until strange events began occurring unexpectedly. One of my twins, maybe 7 years old at the time, suddenly became terrified of going to bed. She refused to sleep with this one toy in her room, an old doll's pram we had recently been given secondhand. She said there was a black man with a tall hat who would push the pram back and forth in her room. The squeaking of the wheels was so loud she had to block her ears, and he wanted her to look, but she would hide under her blanket. I know this sounds bad, but I didn't really take it seriously at the time and kept brushing it off. At the same time, I had started having horrific nightmares, all of them about trying to protect my kids from being taken in weird places with lots of people around. The nightmares were so vivid and awful that they constantly stressed me out and made me dread going to sleep. One night, I woke up from one of those nightmares and walked to the bathroom. I looked down the hallway, and I swore there was something at the end of it. Maybe a little bit insane, but I said, if there's something there, duck off, and the light switched on. I was beyond shocked. That was still, to this day, the most undeniable, can't gaslight myself out of seeing it experience I've had. I didn't put two and two together until the other twin started talking about it. I had asked her to brush her teeth one night. She walked into the bathroom but then sprinted back and jumped on my bed. She said, "Mom, I know you're not going to believe this because it's not real, but it is," and then went on to explain the same top hat man who she said had been hanging around the house for a couple of weeks. She said he followed her around and watched her while she was in her room or the bathroom. I asked if she'd ever spoken to her twin about it. She said no, so I called her in. The conversation they had then was creepy as duck but fascinating to listen to. They were going back and forth describing the same experiences and agreeing with each other. I have no idea why they hadn't talked about it to each other until then, but everything kind of clicked into place then, and we were like, okay, this is weird, we need to sort this out. Ceremoniously threw the toy pram out the front door and tried out a bunch of hippie house cleansing shit. Never happened again after that. 4. The White Lady and the Fat Lady. You're never going to believe this, but we were in yet another old house, lol. The experience was quite straightforward. I kept feeling a light, white, feminine presence around. Like I would see a white cloudy thing out of the corner of my eye sometimes. Didn't feel threatening, so I'd just carry on about my day. Happened pretty often in that house. On the other hand, one of my twins refused to sleep in her initially designated bedroom because of what she called the fat lady. One of the first nights we lived there, she bolted out of her room screaming because the fat lady supposedly stuck her head out of the wall above her and screamed in her face. I did not receive any information regarding it after the initial week or two of residing there, but she refused to enter that room. 5. Presence around late pregnancy/postpartum. Just before I gave birth to my fourth child, I could feel this super positive energy around. Like undeniably something there. Almost like a physical thing that I could see and feel as a light, airy thing. I didn't acknowledge it to anyone, I just felt it there. One day my daughter walks into my room, we're chatting for a sec. I could feel this presence in the hallway at my door but didn't say anything. As my daughter walked out, she paused for a second in the doorway, turned around to me, and went to say something, but I stopped her, told her to wait, and I quickly wrote down what I had been seeing/feeling. Then she told her she could start talking, and yep, she went on to ask me if I'd noticed the white shadowy thing hanging around. I showed her what I'd written down. That one was a pretty cool experience. I don't know why, but I was always certain it was my partner's Nan. I'd never met her. 6. The magic. This is our current experience, which has prompted me to dig all of this up and write it down. My pa died in April of this year. A few days after his funeral, my son's toys started turning on when I'd walk past his room. I brushed it off, but it was significant enough for me to mention it to my sister just so I had it in writing. I didn't acknowledge it to anyone else. Since then, my son, 5 years old, has been talking about what he calls the magic in his room. He's constantly telling me about how the magic keeps moving his toys and taking out his books. I keep suggesting maybe it's one of us moving his things, but he's adamant it's the magic. He says, it wants to push my cars. It's similar to a person, but it isn't real, he adds, like fairies and other mythical beings. He said it's weird, but he doesn't seem scared of it. If you got this far, thanks. Don't blame me if you think I'm insane, full of shit, or both. I honestly don't put much thought into all of this in my day-to-day life, just a little collection of unexplainable experiences. No idea what to make of it all, but it's definitely opened my eyes to the other side of life. I hope there's a God because I have so many questions for him when I die. So I've had many paranormal experiences that make me believe there is a spirit, possibly a specific old man, in my home. But this one is the most unexplainable for me. About 13 years ago I was sleeping in my room with my door shut as usual. It was probably around 11 p.m. to 12 a.m., and the rest of my family, my mom, pops, brother, and nephew, was also sound asleep. It started with a dream I woke up from. Yes, I understand dreams are not necessarily paranormal, but anyways. In my dream I was standing in the kitchen down the hall from my bedroom, and my girlfriend was in the kitchen, standing as still as a statue, just staring down the hallway at my bedroom door. I was trying everything I could to snap her out of it, but she was basically paralyzed, just staring intensely at the door. Then a random old man I didn't recognize walked around the corner, and as soon as I saw his face, I jolted awake. The only thing that related this dream to the rest of the story is that I had a nightmare involving my bedroom door shortly before this episode occurred. When I woke up I was really freaked out, heart racing, sweating, and I couldn't get that old man's face out of my head. I can still see it today, and I practice drawing a lot. I could even draw the old man, but it freaks me out to even think of him. I had turned the light on and was struggling to fall asleep after that. But shortly after I heard the distinct sound of a toy car, dinky car, rolling pretty loudly in the hallway outside my room. The way the hallway is laid out is my room is at one end, the kitchen is directly at the other end, and there is an L-shaped turn to the living room from the kitchen doorway. The dinky car was 100% in the living room because my nephew had to clean up his toys in the play area before bed every night. Well, that toy car rolled so loudly, and I heard it rolling across the floor for a good 5 whole seconds before I got up, assuming my nephew snuck out of his room to play. Then it rolled louder and faster and slammed into the bottom of my bedroom door, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I immediately swung the door open frustratedly, and he wasn't there. Instead, the car sat perfectly, like it had hit my door and stopped dead. I ran to his room, and the door was shut. That's when I realized I did not hear his door open or close at all. I opened his door to check on him, and he was sound asleep. He hadn't moved a muscle, and neither did anybody else in the house. For the rest of the night I left that toy car right where it was and did not go back down the hallway. I stayed awake in the living room playing Halo, trying to take my mind off of it. I shared the story with my parents, who were equally frightened by it. For the next few nights I slept in the living room on the couch with the lights on, playing video games until I fell asleep because I didn't want to think about it. And I have seen that old man in several other dreams since. What do you think? Was the old man messing with me? I think I was followed around by something paranormal when I was a kid. This is something that I really can't explain at all, and any time I tried to look up something similar to my experience, I couldn't find anything. I've told a couple of people about my experience, and some have agreed that it might be something paranormal. I wanted to share something here in hopes someone might know what I experienced. I should start by saying that I'm 18, female, and that my parents are divorced and have been divorced since I was 3. I lived in Texas with my mom until I was 8, and I believe it's when I moved back to California, where I was born, that this experience started happening. I'm not really sure when it exactly happened. It honestly could have even started when I was living in Texas. But sometimes in the morning, while my mom and I were getting ready, I would hear a very distinct ding sound. It sounded a lot like a bell, consistently catching my attention and always producing the same distinct tone. I assumed it would come from my mom's room, since she was the only other person in the house with me. I always thought it was a noise from her dresser because she had glass plates holding her jewelry and perfume. But I'm not sure if I ever saw her at her dresser whenever I would hear the ding sound. I remember asking her one day about the dinging noise and what in her room made it, and she said nothing in her room made that noise. Like I said, it was something so clear and loud for me, and immediately when I heard it, I recognized it. I just brushed it off because it wasn't every day either and just happened once in the morning. But I did heavily associate my mom with this bell-like sound. A few years later, my dad and stepmom planned a New Year's trip with their friends to go to Arizona. So basically they rented a huge house where everyone would stay, and it was mostly for the grown-ups to drink and do whatever while I and my younger siblings would try to entertain ourselves. I believe I was 14 at this time, but the most important thing to remember is that I'm with my dad, and my mom is back in California. I and my siblings shared a room. I and my brother both got the single beds in the room, and my sister slept on an air mattress in between us. And the room we were in was connected to the kitchen, and the other rooms were nowhere close to ours. Being a teenager, I was up late on my phone during the night while my 2 siblings were fast asleep. I believe it was the first night, but I was doing something on my phone, I can't remember exactly, and I heard the ding come from somewhere in the house. It did sound pretty far in the house, so I thought maybe someone had the same thing as my mom. But it was dead silent in the house, and most likely everyone was asleep. It was a quick ding, and I didn't put any thought into it. The next night was probably the scariest experience I've ever had. It was around 1 or 2 a.m., and I was on my phone and probably the only one awake at that hour. I was just minding my business when I heard the ding again, coming from somewhere in the house. Of course I noticed it but went back to what I was doing. Then I heard it again, and again, and again. The same ding, sounding exactly the same, and the pause between each ding was the same. I don't remember ever hearing the ding more than once at a time. But the dinging just kept going, and then I realized it was moving. I could hear it coming from somewhere distant in the house and coming closer to where I was. It sounded like it was floating to me, or something was carrying it to me. Now I should say that the door was wide open to the room I was in, and I wished froze once I realized it was moving. I had never felt so much fear in my life, and when I heard the dinging entering the kitchen, I hid under the covers and tried to pretend I was asleep. It entered the room, and it was super loud at this point, granted I was shaking and terrified. But the dinging never moved from the foot of the bed and stayed there for about 2 minutes. Just dinging over and over again. I believe they were watching me. Finally I heard it leave the room and disappear into the house, and I fell asleep right after. I should also say I never heard any footsteps or anything apart from the dinging. Just the damn dinging over and over again. I told my parents about it in the morning, but they didn't believe me at all. I haven't heard the dinging again ever since that night. And it's a certain ding that I have never heard anywhere else, and hopefully won't ever hear again. I really have no idea what it could be. The only conclusion I have is maybe it was something that followed me until I was 14. It couldn't have been connected to my mom since she wasn't even in Arizona at the time. I sometimes regret not looking up from under the covers or even taking a video so I could have audio of this noise. If anyone has any idea what it could be, please let me know. I can't find anything about it, and I've been curious about this for so long. Thank you for listening, and have a good night, morning, or afternoon. Haunted child. My friend has a nearly 3-year-old son, who is very sweet, but over the past year, he has said some strange things that could previously be dismissed but can no longer be ignored due to recent events. About a year and a half ago, they moved to a new house. Prior to that, they lived in between houses and stayed with her mom in a guest house for some time. She and her sister are very close and co-parent each other's kids when they are all together, which is usually multiple times a week. Her almost 3-year-old boy, Blake, name changed for privacy reasons, has also asked a handful of times the last year for his other mommy. My friend always thought he just meant her sister due to their close relationship. He has also said before that he wants to go back home, even when they are at their house, but they always thought he had meant their mom's house, but he would just repeat that again when she said they were home. During the period of time when they were staying at her mom's house, her older son, who was about 3 at this time, and Blake, who was 1.5, said that he was seeing ghosts, but it could have been correlated with a kid's cartoon that had a ghost dog in it and had stopped after saging. Another time, Blake had been crying all night, so she picked him up, and when she looked at him, she got this horribly dreadful feeling, and something was telling her to put him back down and run, her words. She grabbed him and ran out of the room and slept on the couch with him that night. She said she remembers this sensation of feeling like she's being watched, and that terrified her. About a year ago, her husband also woke up to an older lady standing over him, believed to be a sleep paralysis demon, who screamed, "I can't do this every night." And he had never been so terrified. Today, they were outside, and Blake asked for his other mommy again and said she was a bat again. The bat could be because of an earlier TV episode. But then a little later, his dad came into his room and heard him whispering, and he asked who he was talking to, and he said, "My other mommy." The kids' media input is very structured, and they've never seen anything inappropriate overall. Thoughts? My only paranormal encounter, my grandmother. I want to preface this by saying I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I believe there has to be some kind of afterlife or something. This is the only experience I have ever had that has convinced me that the paranormal may actually exist. This is a true story I've never really shared with anyone, but I decided to share today. The house I used to live in was the same house my grandmother, on my dad's side, lived and died in. She raised my dad and his 5 siblings in that house as a single mom. My dad's father died when he was only 3 years old. Despite her heavy smoking habit and financial struggles, she was evidently a lovely lady. At some point, she passed away, and eventually, my dad inherited the house, and my mom moved in with him. I don't think I ever met my grandmother, since she passed away before I was born. My mom often told me I would have liked her a lot. My mom, dad, my older brother, and I lived in that house until I was 7 years old. When I was a kid, maybe about 5, I sometimes would wake up in the dead of night to see the silhouette of a woman going down the stairs. The figure would only appear for a few seconds. It would be facing down the upstairs hallway, directly into my room, and then turn to face the stairs and float down. I used to think it was the tooth fairy, since the figure looked as if it had enormous wings coming out of its back, and also every time I lost a tooth, I wrote letters to the tooth fairy and left them downstairs along with said tooth. I saw the figure multiple times, even when I had not lost a tooth, and I guess I just thought it was normal since I was convinced the tooth fairy and I were friends or something. I never told my parents about the figure since I was young and sincerely believed it was the tooth fairy. I eventually stopped seeing the figure as I got older, even though I still believed in the tooth fairy. We moved out of that house when I was 7 but lived in the same town. I've lived in this new house ever since. We essentially traded houses. The owner of our current house purchased our old house, and we purchased theirs. The owner said they would live in the house but, strangely enough, decided to rent it out to other people. I thought nothing of it, thinking the buyer was just dishonest. Every now and then, my dad would occasionally go to our old house and do work on it for the owner, as he is a plumber and the house seemed to have persistent damp and pipe problems. I would ask about the house every time he went, since I was very fond of it as a kid. He told me that it seemed to look worse every time he went, and there would seem to be a different tenant living there almost every time he visited. He said the landlords we sold the house to didn't seem to care for it, and it was in disrepair. Eventually, he stopped getting called to do work there. When I was about 18, my dad once again got called to come work on the house, but this time, it seemed to have entirely new owners who weren't renting it out. When I questioned him upon his return home, he informed me that the house appeared to have undergone significant repairs. He asked the new owners about the old landlords, telling them how they seemed to have left the house to rot. The new owners then told my dad that the landlords had chosen to sell the property to them because they couldn't seem to make tenants stay. My dad asked them what they meant by that. They told him something he could barely repeat to me. The tenants claimed to hear creaking noises at night by the staircase, even though there were no rats in the house and no piping in the stairs. 3 separate tenants also claimed to see an old woman walking up and down the stairs at night, as if looking for something. The old woman would also sometimes appear at the end of the bed. We don't believe in that stuff though, it's probably just some scary story one of the tenants' kids made up, or something. I was already incredibly freaked out by hearing all this, and when I tried to ask my dad about it again, he never elaborated. It scared me because my dad is one of the most serious, logical, matter-of-fact people I know, and I am certain he'd never lie to me about his family. I tried to forget about him telling me, and I thought I wouldn't talk about any of the encounters I saw as a kid. But, later that day, my mom came into my room, crying. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that Dad had told her about it all. I asked her if she was afraid at all, and she surprisingly said no. She instead told me about an encounter she had when we used to live there. My mom told me that before my brother was born, she had a dream. She dreamed that my dad's mother came to visit her and stood at the end of her bed. My mom said that grandmother told her that she would be healthy, happy, and would have a baby boy. She also said that things may not go well at first, but the baby boy would be healthy eventually. That's when I started crying too. My brother was born 6 weeks prematurely and couldn't breathe through his nose at all. He had to stay in intensive care for a while but eventually recovered, just like my mom's dream had said. That's when I decided I had to tell her about my experiences as a child too. We spent the night crying a lot but feeling very close, and maybe the ghost of my grandmother had visited us at some point to make sure we were well. Maybe that's what she was doing to the many tenants who stayed in the house since. I'm not sure. I'm 22 now, but I still think about this experience a lot. I still don't know if ghosts are real or not, but if they are, then at least I know that my grandmother was watching over us. Maybe she's still watching over our family now. I've never shared this story because I was afraid nobody would believe it. However, I reconsidered it today and decided that I should share the story. Lost my paranormal sight. My family has a long history of paranormal encounters, and I will eventually get around to sharing some of the more intriguing ones. It seems like every time I talk to my grandparents about this kind of stuff, they have a new story. It's always interested me. When I was just a child, perhaps 4 or 5, my grandparents told me the first story ever. There had just been a death in the family at the time, a distant uncle or great uncle, I can't really remember. Well, he died of old age, completely normal, nothing out of the ordinary, that is, until a couple of nights after the funeral. According to my mom, I woke up in the middle of the night and woke her up, saying, "Mummy, what happened to Uncle's eyes?" Now this completely shocked my mom, not only because I woke her up around 3 a.m. but also because my uncle was an organ donor who just happened to have donated his eyes. As a 4 or 5-year-old, I would not have understood the concept of organ donation, and I see no reason why my family would have explained it to me. My mom always told me that there was no way I could have known about it since I didn't attend the funeral and was at daycare whenever they spoke to relatives about my great-uncle's passing. Over the next couple of years, there were several more incidents in which I seemed to wake from a dream and then say or ask something creepy, without any explanation for how I knew it. Apparently my mom got a little spooked, so she got my grandmother to pray over me while I slept, and I've never had any, let's call it paranormal sight since. I've had paranormal experiences since I was a child. When I was in my teens, my mom and Nana told me that when I was 3 to 4, I used to hide behind the sofa to talk to my friend. They assumed I had an imaginary friend until one day my Nana asked who my friend was. I'd told her that my friend was called Stevie. He had blonde hair like me, and he wanted his lemon bombs, bonbons. My mom had a younger sibling who died when he was 8, as he was run over by a drunk driver. My mom was 16 at the time, and 4 years later, at 20, had me. Her brother was called Stephen. My Nana was Scottish, and we lived not far from the English/Scottish border on the English side. So apart from my Nana speaking Scottish and having an accent, my accent was very much English, so it was odd for me to use a Scottish term such as we, and I couldn't have known about Stephen. Apparently, on the day preceding my 5th birthday, I informed my Nana and mother that little Stevie could no longer visit, and that was the end of it. He was gone, and I never spoke to him again. I do have a vague memory of sitting behind the sofa talking, but I don't remember seeing him. When I got into my teens, odd things would happen in the house. Never directed at me though. Pictures would fall from walls, and over the space of 6 weeks the living room door shook very gently until the day my Nana was hovering in there and the door shut on her and wouldn't open. I was there at the time. I was upstairs with my mom when we heard my Nana shout. We all lived together in the same house Stephen also lived in. I ran downstairs with my mom, and we both witnessed the door shake with my Nana shouting from the other side to stop it and let her out. She thought it was my mom, but it wasn't. There was nobody around. During this time, even though I never had anything happen directly to me, I started to feel like there was something bad in the house, and I started having recurring nightmares about being in the house alone and trying to get out, but an invisible force would chase me, grab me by the feet, and drag me back into the living room. I'm 43 now, and occasionally I still have this nightmare. I always felt like there was something negative attached to me while living there. As an adult, I've also experienced some strange occurrences over the years. Once when my son was a newborn, I'd put him in his cot to sleep at around 8 p.m., so it was dark. I left the room, closed the door, and left the landing light on. His baby monitor was on. I left the house to go to the car to get my bag, and when I looked up at the house, the bedroom light was on. As I got closer to the house, I could hear him crying through the monitor. As I went into the room, he'd gotten tangled in the blanket, and it covered his face, and he was struggling to breathe. Fast forward another few years, and we'd moved house. Odd things used to happen, nothing really weird, just shadows, which could be explained, or our dog staring at walls. The occurrences always became more frequent after an argument had taken place in the house. One morning my husband and I were having a disagreement about our business. We were sitting at the kitchen table facing the living room with the door open. Our little dog was fast asleep on the sofa. Out of nowhere, a giant Yankee candle that had never been lit flew off the table and hit my husband's Xbox, which was sitting next to the cabinet, so hard that it ended up in the kitchen doorway. Our poor dog was terrified and ran into the kitchen to be with us. We then left this house and moved. Things seemed to escalate in our new home. Our dog wouldn't let you leave him alone, which was unlike him. As soon as you walked out the door, he would howl and was really distressed. By this point my son was 18, and we all felt a negative presence. You felt like you were being watched, even with the heating on and being really warm. The room would suddenly have freezing spots that you could feel with your hands, and the Alexa would start playing music, although this type of phenomenon probably happens to other people's Alexas, so it might not be paranormal. One morning my son asked me to stop coming in his room at night. I asked what he meant, and he said that he'd often wake up with his door opening, and he assumed I was standing watching him. He'd ask what I was doing, and the door would just close slowly. It is true that a couple of times I did go into my son's room to see if he was home after he started driving, but this was only a couple of times, and my son never woke up or spoke to me. Then on to my husband. Ever since we've been together, he has suffered from extreme parasomnia. In his dreams, he constantly sees a 7-foot dark figure in the corner of the room, and this has been in every house we've lived in. It taunts him, touches him, and watches him. He then acts out his dreams by pulling me out of bed, picking up our dog to try to escape the room, and standing above me on the bed while screaming, hitting me, and dragging me. This usually happens because he is trying to either fight this dark figure or get me away from it. He's had parasomnia since he was 13 but has only started seeing this dark figure since he's been with me. So that's my story, well, a short condensed version. I've no idea if we are both just sensitive to this stuff. Our current house feels nice with a good energy. We often feel something, but it's nice and warm. My husband still dreams about this thing but not as often. What are your thoughts on this? The White-Eyed Child. There are a few warnings I want to get out of the way before I tell this story. First, there are mentions of suicide. I don't go into detail, just out of respect for the individual involved and their family. Second, I will also be talking about depression and anxiety. This story is extremely dark but also terrifying. I have never had something like this happen again, thank goodness. To begin, I need to tell you what exactly a white-eyed child is. There's not a lot of information about them, but from the research I've done, they're messengers of death. Another name for them is angels of death. A lot of elderly people tend to see them right before they die. It is also said that if you see one, it means either you or someone you know is about to pass on. At the time of the sighting, I had no knowledge about these children or their meanings. I didn't connect the dots until later on, the dots being seeing the child and then the death that followed. So, a little backstory. I got a job at this retirement home after I had to move out of my parents' house at the age of 18. Finding employment was proving difficult, so my best friend's mother, Yola, did me a solid and got me a job at the place she worked. The building was old. It was formerly a train station before it was converted into a retirement home. Because many people lived there for the remainder of their lives, numerous deaths occurred over the years, resulting in reports of shadow figures. I remember asking my coworker about them, and she said it wasn't uncommon to spot one in the corner of your eye. She told me not to worry about it, they were harmless. That was about the extent of the paranormal activity I had encountered. However, while working there, I had some severe anxiety. Something I had never suffered from before. It probably didn't help that the environment was pretty toxic, the boss was sexist, and the kitchen was filled with middle-aged women with nothing better to do than gossip. Now, it wasn't my first time working in a less than ideal place. But at my old job, which just so happened to be Walmart, I never felt anxiety like this. It was always dread. I actually had my first anxiety attack working at that retirement home. It was scary and out of the blue, probably one of the worst experiences of my life, and I never had anxiety again after I left. Anyway, the day I saw the white-eyed child was just a regular work day. I worked as a dishwasher, but I also helped prep, mainly peeling potatoes and helping with other little things. So, I was on my way to the pantry to grab something when this little girl popped up in front of me. The sudden appearance of the little girl startled me so much that I froze in shock, half expecting to slay her. But she was gone just as soon as she appeared. I remember glancing around the kitchen, seeing if my other coworkers spotted the little girl. But they were all carrying on with their tasks as if nothing had happened. I recall some of her details. She wore a white, olden-day dress, blonde pigtails, a white nightcap, and white eyes. I might have only seen her for a millisecond, but I'll never forget how her eyes had no irises or pupils. To describe the dish pit, it was in the shape of the U. Beside my workstation was a door that led out to the dining room. The door had a small window. This is important to the story. These large windows in the dining room overlooked the street in front of the building. It was around 2 p.m. when I spotted red and blue flashing lights in that little window. My coworker came in shortly after in tears. I asked her what was wrong, and she informed me a resident had taken their life. For some reason, I decided to walk out of the kitchen to see that the entire street was filled with fire trucks, ambulances, and police. Again, I won't go into detail, but I will say it was horrible. I knew who the resident was. They were kind, they were caring, and they were a wonderful human being. Their passing weighed heavily on us all, making working at that place even harder. I'm unsure how to describe this next part, but the atmosphere felt heavy, not sad, but evil. I know I sound insane, but in addition to feeling sad for our friend, it felt as if something had taken up residence in that building, something that was feeding off of our misery. There were many deaths following this passing, a lot of health problems, and even the employees were suffering from the effects. I fell into a deep depression that I'm still suffering from, although that has been something I've been struggling with for a while. Anyway, that is the story of the white-eyed child. It's incredibly dark and does not have a happy ending, but I will never forget it. I will say that if you or someone you know is suffering, please reach out. I know I sound like a broken record, but from one broken person to another, you're not alone, and more importantly, don't be ashamed of reaching out. You're not weaker for admitting you need help, you're a heck of a lot stronger for it. Alright, I could go on and on about mental health stuff, but thanks for listening. I saw something weird on my baby monitor. I am a 34-year-old female, and I was hanging out downstairs while my 5-year-old son slept upstairs in bed, just like every night. I have a camera baby monitor that is closed circuit and does not even connect to the internet. It's basically only a camera and a handheld screen and doesn't hook up to a cell or anything. Anyway, last night I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I noticed my kiddo moving around, so I started watching the monitor to see if I needed to run up and lie with him before he fully awoke. Then it looked as if he was lifted an inch or so and tossed, so then I really watched the monitor, thinking I didn't see what I thought I saw. Then it appeared as if he was scooted up, and something seemed to grab him by his upper arms and pull him into a sitting position with his head tilted back, similar to how one might move a sleeping person who is limp. I immediately ran upstairs and flipped the light on to find him sound asleep between the pillows, covered in sweat. I called my husband in a panic because I was very freaked out, and he told me that I probably didn't see it right or was imagining things and to not let it bother me. I could not get my heart rate and breathing to calm after about 10 minutes of sitting in the bed next to my sleeping kid, so I ended up scooping him up and bringing him downstairs to sleep on the couch because I sure as hell wasn't going to sleep up there and neither was he. My husband stated that it was unwise for me to do that, but I felt extremely uneasy being upstairs. My son slept through everything, from being scooped up, carried downstairs, and placed on the bed, as well as me staying up for several more hours watching TV and not being able to sleep, and woke up when I got up for work this morning at 5 a.m. I am unsure of the specific answers I am seeking. I am overwhelmed and deeply frightened by what I have witnessed. Unexplained childhood experience, spiritual/paranormal? When I was around 11 to 13 years old, I experienced something that I, to this day, have no answers for. I woke up for school one morning and walked across the passageway to the bathroom. I stood in front of the sink and mirror to brush my teeth. As I looked into the mirror, I blacked out. I did not black out physically, instead, my body felt frozen as if in fear, and I began to see a scene that unfolded like this. I was seeing a POV of myself floating in space, surrounded by stars and dark space. Directly in front of me, but quite far away, I saw a house. A house floating in space. It was a stereotypical house. A red wooden door right in the middle with a window on each side. Green bushes at the front. I was floating closer to the house, almost like zooming in on it. I got closer and closer, and when I got right up to the door, it opened, and I saw the face of a woman with black hair. She was old, and her face made me feel fear like I've never felt before. As soon as I saw her face, she screamed, and I woke up. I was looking at myself in the bathroom mirror again. I was still frozen in fear, similar to the feeling of waking up from a nightmare and not being able to move or scream. But maybe that's not a universal experience. Anyway, I think it must have lasted a few seconds, maybe a minute. But it felt like forever. It took me a moment to compose myself and try to get ready for school. The following morning when I woke up, it happened again. This condition carried on for a few weeks, if memory serves me correctly. It became intermittent, with days in between that were normal. Every time it was the same thing: space, the house, the door, and the screaming old woman. People I've told this story to have always asked me what she looked like and if I knew her. But I didn't. Her face was hard to describe. The best comparison I can make is to the uncanny. Almost like an AI-generated face that was randomized and just looks kind of off. Something almost human, that should be human, but has something about it that isn't. That feeling took over my body. The fear was almost unbearable. It was almost like losing consciousness or having a vision, I don't exactly know. But my body didn't fall to the floor, I just froze. My eyes stayed open, but what I saw around me was not my bathroom. I told my parents about it, they didn't know what to think. And I doubt I could describe it as well as I can now. They told me to wait and see if it happens again. They chopped it up to something like being half asleep and still dreaming. For a few days it didn't happen, and I thought it had finally stopped. Then, one Sunday afternoon, I was in the living room with my dad. He was watching a soccer game. I was at the desk area behind the couch, packing some things away. And it happened again. The same as it always did: the fear, freezing, space, the house, and the women. When I came around, I just cried. I went over to my dad, who noticed something was wrong. I told him that it happened again. It was now happening during the day, while I was very awake, and around my family. AKA I should feel safe, which in my mind rules out anything about me being in a sleep-wake state or still dreaming. They took me to my doctor, who listened to my story and also didn't really have any answers. He told me to wait it out. After seeing my doctor, it didn't really happen for a long time. I thought that really explaining it to someone must have released whatever hold it had on me. About a year or two later we relocated overseas for my dad's job. I was 14. The last time it happened was the first morning moving into our new house. Since that day, it hasn't happened again. I'm now 27 and still have no answers. If anyone has any answers for me, or has had a similar experience, or maybe can refer me to a space/community where I can find answers about this, please let me know. I played with a child's ghost in the children's hospital ER when I was 3. When I was 3 or 4, I fell pretty violently down the staircase in my family's old Massachusetts Victorian home, and my parents took me to Baystate Children's Hospital, one town over in Springfield, Massachusetts. I just had a busted lip from hitting the wall on the way down because it was one of those staircases that turns and then continues downwards, but my parents were concerned I hit my head, so despite my crying and protesting at the idea of going to the doctors, they took me. I remember being absolutely terrified at the idea of possibly needing stitches in my lip, so I cried the whole way there. The one good thing I remember about this place was the big playroom they had in the regular children's hospital unit. However, the children's ER only had a few of those bead toys on a wooden box with the squiggly plastic bits to slide the beads on. I don't know what they're called. I sat down in front of the toy and started sliding the blocks and beads around the loops and turns of the plastic. Then a boy started talking to me, and when I looked up, he was on the other side of the toy. I remember being taken aback, as I'd never seen gore before. The most gore I had seen was when my parents were scrambling for the remote while we were watching The Simpsons and Itchy and Scratchy came on. The side of the boy's head was cracked completely open, and as I took in his injury, a strange scent hit me, sort of a sickly sweet smell, but it was barely there, if that makes sense. I was a very anxious child, so I tried my hardest to hide my uneasiness, smiled at him, and continued to play. I remember he asked me, "What happened to you?" And I answered that I fell down the stairs. Then I asked him, "How did you get your boo-boo?" gesturing towards my own head. He answered simply that he fell, and we kept playing. At the time I thought he was a boy I knew from school, as he looked slightly similar, minus the cracked open head, so I felt comfortable with him after a few minutes. We chatted about how we were both afraid of being at the doctor's and of being hurt from whatever the treatment would be. That's pretty much the end of the memory. I got medicine on my lip, and they checked my head to make sure it wasn't hit during my fall. Then a month or so later there was a fire drill at my school. We were all lined up in the parking lot, and I spotted the kid who I thought was the one in the ER with me, but to my surprise, his head was perfectly intact, with not even stitches or a scar. His hair growth was also completely uninterrupted, and I knew the doctors would shave down the hair to treat the wound. In that moment I basically just shrugged it off as my mistake, it wasn't that kid. So finally, a few years ago when I was 20, I brought this memory up to my parents, and they had no idea what I was talking about. They remembered my fall and the trip to the ER and me playing in the waiting room, but not any boy with a cracked open head playing along with me. They said if his head was as I described, he would not be in the waiting room just hanging out. When they said that my adult brain processed the memory again, I was basically like, "Oh yeah, what the duck?" Then I remembered the smell that emanated from him as we talked and played. I kept trying to place it as the smell of infection or maybe just the dried out inside of his wound. But then I remembered where I smelled that before, just much more strongly. When I lived in Okinawa, Japan, as a preteen, there were a ton of stray cats everywhere. One day I went on a walk with my class at my international school. It was in basically a rural Japanese neighborhood with lots of farms around. As we walked up this one hill, the boy leading us started gagging and groaning, and the rest of us just laughed because we thought he was either messing around or just being dramatic, but then the stench hit us. I'd never smelled death so strongly like that before, and my eyes literally watered. We hesitantly made our way to the top of the hill in search of the source of the odor. We noticed a red-stained bag hanging off a low branch on a tree, and the boy who originally smelled it quickly dashed over to peek into the bag and then ran back gagging. Apparently there were 3 dead, bloody cats stuffed into the grocery bag and unceremoniously hung up. It was through the memory of that smell that I identified what the scent of the boy in the ER was. It was the tangy, sweet, rotting smell of putrefying flesh, just watered down so it was almost unnoticeable. Stories from my childhood home. Despite my fondness for ghost stories, the paranormal, and the occult, I tend to lean towards skepticism. Probably because my parents firmly denied the existence of ghosts, magic, and anything else that couldn't be explained rationally, and that rubbed off on me. So I'm a skeptic, but because of my experiences, I'm not a total unbeliever. So I'm going to tell my stories and stories from people who have been in my home, and I would like your input on whether I just had an overactive imagination or if my house was actually haunted. So, let's get the less firmly remembered stuff out of the way, seeing things out of the corner of my eye, like a human-shaped shadow ducking behind the couch, or a flash of light in a dark hallway. Hearing my name called when no one else was home, hearing footsteps, hearing knocking. Strange feelings of unease generally. I wasn't an easily spooked kid, but even into my teen years, I couldn't stand being in the dark in that house. I still can't, even though I have no problem with the dark anywhere else, except in the woods behind that house, which were still part of the property. Now for the first thing I clearly remember, I was a kid playing outside in the backyard, and I looked up and saw this tall feminine figure in a long white dress walking in the woods behind my house, just beyond the fence. I thought it was weird that she'd wear that to go through the woods, but when I went to approach her, she vanished after going past a tree. My parents said she probably just turned a different way. Another instance was when I was lying in bed, and it was dark save for a small, blue night light. Suddenly, the entire room begins to fill with a bright white and orange light, which makes everything visible in greater detail. Then, I only see white light for a moment before it suddenly returns to darkness, leaving just the small night light. No one had turned on any lights. My mom insisted she never got out of bed. Not a single instance, but I vividly remember seeing the occasional glowing handprint on my bedroom walls appear and then disappear. Once I got my own room, things of mine started going missing, especially money. I was convinced it was my brother, so I bought a small safe and started putting my stuff in there. I put in any cash I had, as well as any sunglasses, necklaces, rings, or anything else of personal value. It kept going missing, even though I was the only one who had the code and never wrote it down. Things would literally vanish out of a locked safe in my closet. This one is my girlfriend's story. She was watching over the house while my mom was in surgery and my siblings and I were out of town with my dad. I never told her about my experiences until after this, but she calls me, terrified, saying she thinks my house is haunted because she heard footsteps in the house and knocking on the bedroom door. She looked out, and there was no one there. All the doors leading outside were still locked. She refused to ever be alone in the house again after that. If it helps, she did once bring over a friend who claims she's a Wiccan and an empath and can sense energy. We didn't mention the house to her, but that friend left in a hurry. The most recent instance was just before I moved out. I woke up from a fairly peaceful sleep to the sound of this deep, low growling, like a Doberman was standing over me. We don't and have never owned a dog, as my mother is terrified of dogs. It continued for about a second and a half after I woke up and ended when I bolted upright, worried that a stray had somehow ended up in my bedroom. There was nothing. Just me. Now for stuff that's even less believable, my dreams. I have never had as many dreams, nor as vivid of dreams, as I had at that house. I had recurring dreams of being some crawling, slithering thing, like a centipede crawling through my house, up to my bed, where I'd see myself sleeping, and then I'd wake up as I lunged for myself. I had a dream of sitting alone in a dark, moldy classroom made of rotting, decrepit, green wood, and seeing this light outside surround the room, spilling in through the cracks between the wood planks, and the classroom started to shake violently, and I heard this banging like something was trying to get in or tear the wood apart, and then I woke up. I had recurring dreams of my brakes going out while I was driving, which I'm sure everyone has. I am only mentioning this because last week, my brake line actually ruptured while I was driving, resulting in a collision. Those were the dreams that really stuck with me through the years, even though I haven't had them since I was maybe 15 or 16. So that's it. That's everything outside the norm. I can think of that I can remember, 6 years after moving out. Nothing super crazy, no horror movie nonsense. A lot of it was a general feeling of unease and small things. Things slightly to the left of normal, aside from the few things I can vividly remember. Things being in different places than you left them, a creak in the floorboard that normally only creaked when someone stepped on it, slight temperature changes between rooms, and small sounds with no real origin. Outside of those few instances I can remember, it wasn't super scary. Most of it just kind of faded in the background, and when I got my place, it felt like something was missing without that uneasiness and feeling of being just outside normal. Hell, the most at home I felt in the early days of being on my own was when I woke up to the sound of my mirror falling off the bathroom wall and shattering about a month after I moved in. I was terrified, but at the same time, it felt more like home, and I slept better, if that makes sense. But that had a totally reasonable explanation when I really looked at it in the morning. So, do y'all think my house was haunted, or am I haunted, or do I just have an overactive imagination? Or something else? My haunted life, true stories of paranormal experiences. 1. What goes on behind slamming doors? This story is not my own but rather a story told by both my mother and my father. After more than 15 years of separation, my parents still vividly remember this story. I was about 7 months old, and my parents had just recently moved into an old farmhouse that was owned by my grandparents before my grandmother passed away. It is located in a small city near the coast of Texas, which is rooted deeply in the settlement of the state. One night at an unknown time, my parents had been asleep for several hours, and we kids were all asleep. My siblings and I all shared a bedroom located next to my parents' room. The bathroom door, which is located only 2 or 3 steps right out in front of my parents' bedroom, slammed shut. This woke my parents up, and my dad got out of bed thinking that it was one of my sisters. He walked to the bathroom door and noticed that all of the water was running from the shower to the sink, and even the toilet had flushed. The light was on, and the door was locked. He knocked, and nobody answered. He then checked the bedroom that we were staying in, and everyone was still in their own beds. At this point, he knew that something wasn't right and returned to the bathroom door to knock again. No answer. At this point my dad, being a short and stocky guy, proceeded to bash the door in with his shoulder and broke the door down, only to find an empty bathroom. Water on, shower running, sink at full blast, and the light on. He shut everything off, checked the house, and then went back to sleep. To this day, It is a complete mystery as to how that happened and what might have caused it. 2. The things that followed us closely. These events took place at some friend's house located about 45 minutes away from the aforementioned house but still in the general area. Our friends lived in what appeared to be a home built in the late 70s to the early 80s. It was a rather large single-story home that was laid out a bit funny, looking back now. You walk in, and on your right is the dining room, followed by the kitchen, followed by a back room that connects to the garage. Directly in front of you is the small living room, and to the right of that is the large living room with 2 other rooms attached to it, which is also attached to the kitchen. Confused yet? Yeah, I was 2 as a child. To the left was a very, very long hallway, which allocated 3 bedrooms and a bathroom at the very end of the hallway. I was young, and my sisters being older, they seemed to play around with this stuff more, and I was excluded. It's my understanding that my sisters and my friends, who were all older than me, snuck off and played with the Ouija board and poked around in other strange things that kids do, like Bloody Mary and the whole light as a feather, stiff as a board thing. They really only did this because it was common knowledge that this house was very active with spirits. Oftentimes, in the small living room, there would be cigarette smoke that hung around randomly that was also visible, despite nobody in the house being a smoker. I was always told that sometimes they saw a man sitting on the couch in that room. In the room connected to both the kitchen and the garage, there seemed to be a lot of activity, and I assume most of the screwing around took place. This is the oldest of my friend's room, let's call her Amy. In this room, Amy had the walls covered in some sort of black paper that could be written on. This paper covered all of the walls in the room, and it was loosely hung on the walls. My sisters to this day claim that they would use the walls to speak to whatever spirits were in the house. One night in particular, they were making contact, and the spirit would tap on the paper once for yes and twice for no. At one point they asked a question that it didn't like, I don't know what the question was, and the spirit took its hand and ran it along the paper all the way down the walls of the whole room, doing a circle about 3 times before they felt something lying over the top of them, pinning them to the bed. They said that in the mirror, they could see a tall shadow man with a top hat lying over the top of them. This lasted for a few seconds before he disappeared and they were released. Oftentimes the door to this room would lock on its own from the outside, the kitchen side, and if you were in that room and wanted to get out, you'd have to exit the house via the back door, which was located in said room. The hallway, which the bathroom was located on, is one of particular interest, as this is where the bulk of my own personal experiences would take place. I would always get this eerie feeling, like somebody was watching me in the hallway that I had to travel down to reach their bathroom. This prompted all of us kids to run down the hallway to get to the bathroom, but if you stopped suddenly while running, you could hear and feel phantom footsteps running and stopping directly behind you after you had already paused. When my friends moved out of there, we assisted them. Once we had packed the main house away, the garage was last. When we finished with that part, my mother told my sister to go close the garage door. My sister obliged and began walking up to the house, and midway between the truck trailer and the house, the garage door closed itself. At that point, we all got into the truck and left. I haven't been back to that house since. In fact, I'm not even sure how to get back to it, but I know that there was something dark there, and I am unsure if it still resides there to this day. 3. The reason I keep my door closed. As a kid growing up in our farmhouse, there were many things that kept an 8-year-old on edge. I slept with a night light and always had trouble falling asleep in the evening. The shadows cast upon my walls weren't my fear. The bumps in the night are what kept me awake. As I lay there during one late night when everyone was in bed and asleep, I began to hear footsteps approaching my bedroom that I slept alone in. It stopped at my doorway, turned and walked to my sister's bedroom directly across from mine, stopped, turned, and walked back to my doorway, where it paused, and repeated this process all throughout the night. Upon peeking into the hallway, there was nobody there, creating these phantom footsteps on our old hardwood floors. From that night forward I slept with the door closed and the room pitch black, as I was afraid to see what might lurk beyond the shadows. 4. It haunts me from under the bed. When I was about 12 years old, my mother was making dinner and sent me into the spare bedroom to make the bed with freshly washed sheets, as my cousin had stayed the night prior. This is an old bed, one of which belonged to my stepfather's father. He was my grandpa for all intents and purposes. I loved the man, and he treated me like family. I remember just wanting to get the task done so that I could go back to playing RuneScape on the computer located in the same room. I was almost done stretching the thin red sheet over the last corner at the bottom right-hand side of the bed when a hand smacked the top of my bare foot from under the bed. Skin on skin contact, I felt the palm and fingers. This was undoubtedly a hand that had come from under the bed. My sister, who was the only other sibling living in the house at the time, was gone visiting a friend, and I was in the back of the house, completely alone. This is the same room from the previous story, as it used to be my bedroom before I nabbed a new one. I ran all the way through the house and back to the kitchen where my mother was, where I screamed, cried, and refused to go back in there and finish the job. My mother thought that I was being dumb at first, but then she realized after threatening me within an inch of my life that I was serious and I was not going to return and finish the job under any circumstances. She finished up dinner, made the bed herself, and after that had plenty of computer time to herself because I refused to go back into that room. I only went back in there a handful of times for the remainder of the time that we lived there. To this day, at 26 years old, I don't like my feet being on the floor near the bed. Anything under the bed freaks me out, I have severe anxiety, and I refuse to keep my feet on the floor for long. 5. New home, old land, same problems. In June of 2006, we moved to my stepfather's land that he inherited from his family. This is about a 3-hour drive, give or take, from where we previously lived. The land is located outside of a small town that is barely on the map, and it's a 15-minute drive through heavily wooded areas, rolling pastures, and gravel roads. The first real experience that I can recall here would be sitting at home at about 14 or 15 years old. I was heavily into World of Warcraft because I was a social recluse with my health being bad and being in a new area, having little to no real friends. While playing on my laptop in my bedroom, to my right was my doorway, and for whatever reason, I had more doors open, I know, right? I should have learned the first time. I was awaiting the arrival of my parents, who were on their way home with groceries, and I was home alone. I heard what sounded like a hand brush across my wooden door, and as I turned and looked, I saw the leg of a person walking down the hallway. This person appeared to be wearing a flowing white gown and was barefoot. This wasn't my eyes adjusting or some sort of weird trick of the mind. The combination of the sound that grabbed my attention to begin with and then looking directly at this figure walking out of view of my doorway and down the hall was a very real occurrence. I knew that my parents were not home, but I still called and asked my mother where they were. She told me that they were still about 10 minutes away and they would be home shortly. Panicked, I told her what happened, and she told me to just stay calm and they'd be home soon. I walked through the house with her on the phone and saw nothing. It was eerily silent, and I was the only person in the house. I returned to my room, and upon my parents' arrival, the sight of their headlights through the windows and bouncing off of the walls was liberating. This is the moment that I absolutely made sure that my door was closed at all points in time when I was in my room. 6. He visited me. After a long night of gaming and sleeping well into the afternoon, I awoke and decided that it was wise to shower before I started my weekend. I walked over to my closet, picked out some clothes, and headed towards the bathroom. I reached my door when I realized that I had forgotten to turn off my closet light. I stopped, turned, and began walking towards the closet. Halfway to the closet, the light switch flipped itself into the off position. I saw the light turn off, I heard the heavy switch flip itself down, and I paused. I took a few more steps forward and peeked into the closet to examine the switch, and to my disbelief, it had in fact been switched to the off position. I shrugged this off, turned around, and made my way to the bathroom, where I put my clothes on the floor and headed to the toilet to relieve myself. When I passed the shower door, I heard "Good morning, Jeff" coming from inside the shower, which was completely empty. This voice was that of my grandfather, my stepdad's father. It wasn't threatening, and it didn't scare me, it only put me a little on edge and caught me off guard. I finished my business and decided that I'd wait another day to shower. 7. Waking up next to the dead. This happened 2 years prior to the last story, back in my old hometown, while staying with my biological father in his house, different from the one that we moved from. I was there because he had taken me to visit a friend of his who has Lyme disease. For the majority of my life, my ailment was a giant question mark, and doctors had all but given up on trying to figure out what was wrong with me. After I met and spoke to this person and her family, everything seemed to align very well with my symptoms. Despite having been tested 3 separate times for Lyme, I was convinced that this was likely the cause. I later learned that the standard testing for Lyme is hilariously faulty and doctors at the time weren't Lyme literate, but that's a whole different story. After returning to my father's house a few months later and after setting up an appointment with a doctor out of state, I stayed the night at his house, and we woke up at 3 a.m. to get on the road to visit this doctor and hopefully get a diagnosis. I was nervous on account of the fact that I disliked doctors, traveling long distances, and possibly facing yet another dead end with my prognosis. I have this reoccurring thing that happens where I'm lying in bed and the bed shakes. This doesn't matter where I'm at or what bed I'm in, it just happens. I've even measured it one time on a geometer while staying at a beach house. So, here I am lying in a dark room while the bed starts to shake. I brush it off, roll over, and get some much needed sleep, still nervous, but eventually I was able to fall asleep. I heard my dad wake up, as he is just down the hall, and I knew that he was about to open the door and turn the light on. I was awake at this point, rolled over, and saw a woman lying next to me with long, dark, flowing hair. I wasn't completely conscious, as my brain wasn't able to process this properly, but I was awake enough to be aware of what was going on around me. I thought in that moment that it was my girlfriend at the time, and we lay staring at each other briefly. My dad opens the door, and as he reaches to turn on the light, this figure rolls out of bed and just disappears. At this point it dawned on me that I'm at my dad's house. That made no sense, and this person is just gone. She made no noise while rolling out of bed, nothing. I climbed over to the edge of the bed, looked around, and didn't find a trace. My dad was puzzled and asked what was wrong. After telling him, I learned that he's had a few experiences of his own. We picked up my grandfather on the way to the doctor, and my dad brought up what had happened to me earlier that morning. My grandfather used to live in the house directly behind my dad's. In fact, my dad grew up there. My grandfather told us that the lady that lived there with her husband had hung herself a few years back before my dad purchased the house. He explained what she looked like, and from what I could make out, he described the lady that I saw exactly how she appeared to me. I wasn't threatened or frightened. In fact, I felt peaceful. I feel like she was there letting me know that everything was going to be okay and work out just fine. I later moved in with my father and stayed in the room for a while, but not much happened. That's getting ahead of myself, but just a little side note. 8. Unexplained voices at unexplained times. 2 years ago, after having moved in with my father, I met my wife, and we moved back to the area from the previous stories. We settled down in our own apartment, and we frequently visit my mother and stepfather. One night we were sitting down at the kitchen table with my sister, who was going through a terrible divorce and was staying at my mother's. Her daughter was staying in the upstairs loft with a baby monitor. She is about 7 years old at this time. My niece has terrible night terrors, which is why my sister felt the need to keep a baby monitor in the room. The receiving monitor sat next to us in the living room. My sister, my wife, and I were all huddled together in the kitchen talking when we heard the baby monitor become filled with static. A loud, very pronounced, deep, raspy man's voice picked up on the monitor like it was speaking right into it. My niece immediately began to freak out and cry, so my sister rushed upstairs to check on her, and she said that she had a bad dream. She was, of course, the only person upstairs. We have no explanation for this, especially given that my parents live so far out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. There's no reason for radio chatter to be randomly picked up on the baby monitor. It wasn't a voice we were familiar with, however, as we were worried about her crazy ex possibly coming onto the property to kidnap her daughter. Yes, he's much more unstable than that. We looked all around the house and the outside property. We found no evidence of anyone getting into her room, the only window in the room being impossible to access, on the property, or in the gated driveway, and the guard chickens did not alert us to an intruder. LOL, they are better than the dogs. This has not happened again. 9. It rang. The second or third time back in town and visiting my mother, she complained of the phone, which had been disconnected from the landline for over some 10 years, continuing to ring as of late. I believe I shared the story of the strange phone setting itself off of the ringer in a previous story, which led to us eventually disconnecting the landline, on top of the god-awful amount of money spent keeping the landline going in the first place. I found it very odd that it just started happening, especially since I had returned back home from having moved. After much talking and dinner, the phone sure enough rang from the bathroom. Yes, my mother has a phone next to the toilet. I went over and picked up the phone, and it was dead, not a sound, nothing. I disconnected the wire from the phone for my mom and called it even. I believe this was the day that my mother decided to tell my wife, fiancé at the time, that I see things, a lot. Now, my wife, up to this point, knew that I have unexplained experiences, and she was quite aware of most of my stories, but that's not really something I like to just share with anybody. Well, my mom decided it was a good idea, so, thanks, Mom. After rolling my eyes and much to my dismay of explaining this to my wife, I excused myself to use the bathroom. My wife and mother were standing in the kitchen chattering on, and I was left to myself. I sat down on the toilet to do my business, and from beneath the door, there's a decent gap, I saw a shadow walk across the front of the door. I asked who it was, and nobody answered. After finishing up my business, I came back out and asked who was just in the washroom, and my mom and wife said that they had been in the kitchen the whole time. I guess this was its way of welcoming me home. 10. Closing doors and freezing rooms. This took place around the time that Hurricane Harvey hit. My wife and I stayed at my parents' house in case we lost power in our apartment. We would probably still have power there. My biological dad also didn't have anywhere to go to evacuate from the coast, so I offered my apartment to them while we were away so that there would be room for everybody. While staying at my mom's house, my wife decided to go to the bedroom, my old room, to change clothes. The door closed behind her. This door is heavy enough to not be moved by a simple draft of air or walking by. This is also a log cabin, and at this point, the wood had begun to swell with the humidity on the rise from the foreboding hurricane. This causes the gap between the door and the trimming to rub, creating friction and causing the door to be even sturdier to begin with. Long story short, there was no reason for this door to close behind my wife. That night, we were watching TV, and a cold spot came over us while sitting on the bed in the bedroom. We looked up to find that our fan blade was now spinning, despite the power not being used for that function. It was free spinning as if it had been pushed. This cold spot moved from me to between my wife and myself and then eventually over to her side and then to the end of the bed. This spot was much colder than the rest of the room, and we could physically track its movement. I told it to leave us alone, which it didn't do the first time and was scaring my wife, so I got angry and demanded it leave, to which it listened. We tracked it as it left, heading towards the door and dissipating. I slept like a rock that night, but my wife said that she couldn't sleep and that she felt like somebody was watching her the whole night. 11. You can't leave, you have to stay. While visiting my parents and some family who had come in, along with some friends, my wife and I had a good night playing Cards Against Humanity and goofing off with everybody. It was about 2 a.m. when we decided to pack up and leave. Everybody was heading off to bed, and my wife and I started heading to the car. She unlocked the car door remotely when it locked again. She thought maybe she had hit the button and unlocked it again, only for the door to lock back up. At this point, she was weirded out and told me and unlocked the door, making sure she didn't press the lock button. Sure enough, the door locked again. It had done this several times until we were packed up and in the car, ready to go. This had never happened and has not happened since. I guess it just really didn't want us to leave. Wife note, written personally by late wife. The woods directly to the side of the farmhouse have always unsettled me, but only this particular section. The first time I visited the log house, I saw something in the woods, which no one else had seen, even though it had been there for, evidently, over a year, wreckage from a tornado. The reason why they found it was because I saw something not natural in the woods. I'm still not convinced that what I initially saw ended up being the wreckage, as it was moving. Heavy metal roofs lifted only by tornadoes do not move on non-windy days. It was white, very large, tree canopy tall, and moving back and forth in the far distance in the woods. It was at a perfect level for me to see when I got out of the car to get his wheelchair out, which is strange, being that I am relatively short, and my line of sight is at a weird angle. Even my husband didn't see it until I backed him up to be at my line of sight with his wheelchair. All this to say, those woods creeped me the duck out. That same night as the car locking issue, I heard very loud screaming from that particular area. Now, me being the person I am, rushed over there to make sure that no one was hurt, as it sounded like an older, 35-55-ish, woman. There was nothing. No movement, no animal forms, nothing. My husband and I have lived in areas like this all our lives, and it sounded like no animal we have ever heard. It genuinely sounded like a person. He's lived in that particular area for most of his life and has heard and encountered every animal capable of making noises, and it didn't match that particular sound, i.e., hogs, cougars, other big cats, one black panther in particular that liked to hang around that hasn't been there in years, coyotes, and big birds. When you live out in the country, you learn real fast what noises are dangerous and what are not, what are normal animals, and what are humans in distress. A further note, about 5 minutes walking distance from their driveway/home, about 4 years ago, a young woman died in a very bad car wreck, for which he was the first person to come upon. 13. There's something in the office. Recently, about a month or two ago, my family came to visit my parents in the log house again. My wife and I decided against driving back that night and that we would sleep in the office, which is located outside the main building. My parents were fine with it and set it up for us. This office is almost done, but there are some finishing touches to complete it. We were sleeping on an air mattress this night and decided we could wash clothes while we were there, so we had clothes in the washer in the house. I got up to check on them and heard some strange rustling around in the woods, and the sensor light outside kept turning on. I got my wife to help me unlock the door because, for whatever reason, it wouldn't budge. Everything was done, and it was time to go to bed. I put all of that out of my mind, and despite the loud, obnoxious dogs that my parents have, we attempted to get some sleep. Late into the night we heard something fall and hit the air mattress. Unsure of what it was, we went back to sleep. Later, we had plastic lids to some cargo boxes my mom had falling on the floor, which crashed and woke us up. My wife chuckled after she realized that the chair that they were on must have been touching the air mattress, and it just caused the chair to move and the kids to fall. Neither of us wanted to get up and turn on the light to investigate fully, and this seemed to make sense. This happened several more times throughout the night, but we were both lazy and cold and didn't bother with it. Upon waking up in the morning, we found that the chair was in fact not touching the bed, it was completely solo and undisturbed by the blow-up mattress. There was no reason for these lids to fall. I also found one of my great-grandmother's sewing things, the thing you poke needles into, lying next to the bed. This was previously located across the room on my mother's sewing table. This had been what we previously felt and heard hit the bed. It had been tossed across the room. While we were gathering our things to leave, more items were knocked off the chair while we were not near it. 14. Excuse me, kind spooks, is this a spooky stick-up? The most recent event to take place at my parents' house was late into the evening/early morning after washing clothes. We left at about 3:30 a.m. to head back home. Yes, we are night owls. Upon reaching the end of my parents' gravel road, there is a stop sign. My wife rolled up to it, didn't even stop, not a normal driving behavior for her at all. She stops at every sign, even on dirt roads in the middle of nowhere, and then floored it. We heard something hit the back of the car and stopped to check the car at a gas station when we got into town. We found nothing wrong. Upon asking my wife what had happened, she told me that she saw a man dressed in a white shirt come running up to the car from the ditch. I never saw the guy, and having lived in the area and traveled the roads so often, I've had to learn how to see everything on these roads for safety's sake. Animals, trees, rocks, everything is a hazard when you're so far out in the middle of nowhere. I didn't see the guy, she said. He was right next to her window, which, as stated again, I never saw. The bizarre part is for me to not see this guy, which is highly unlikely. He would have had to have been lying down in the ditch, far into the ditch at that. The ditch is steep, and for a person to move that quick out, they would have to be taller than me, and I'm over 6 feet tall. Back in the day, I've had to go down into those ditches, and I know how steep they are and how hard they are to climb out of. It would have taken several seconds for any person to get out like that and be up on the car, but this happened all within only a few seconds. If this were for some reason a botched stick-up, again, the likelihood of that is far-fetched for the reason foretold. It's also highly unlikely due to our location. It's a small conservative town where everybody knows everybody, and things like that just don't happen, especially not out in the woods. 15. Would you like demons with that coffee, sir? These events took place before the last story, but for the sake of location, it's being put here. This is going to be a compilation of things that happen in our apartment and why. We managed to get a really good deal on our apartment, which is nice, and we like it. We never really had many things to complain about, besides a noisy neighbor. And demons. It all started out after my wife found that she was having some issues with her job/boss at a chain coffee shop. She decided that she was going to find a new job, and she found one working at a hotel here in town as one of their baristas. My wife soon found herself having odd experiences in the hotel, such as lights turning themselves on and off and following her down the hallways and kitchens. Seeing some weird things, chandeliers swinging, things of that nature. She was informed by one of the cooks that the hotel was in fact haunted. Everyone's seen it, everyone knows. Over time, experiences turned into full-blown events for the hotel staff, to the point where many of them who had to stay overnight asked for others to accompany them. Everybody had seen this thing and had experiences, but it was isolated to the hotel. After some unfortunate times I and my wife had, it left us both in an unstable emotional state, which is what we believe to have caused the following events. My wife and I started experiencing things in our apartment. The lights would turn on and off right in front of you, the toilet would flush on its own, doors would open or close on their own, shadows would move throughout the apartment, and change would be thrown at me in particular from seemingly out of nowhere. Around this time my wife also started having very vivid dreams of being somebody else, seeing shadow people, dealing with spirits, etc. One morning while getting ready for work, she saw our cat in the mirror behind her. Only to remember that we don't have a cat. Shortly after, she traveled to the Houston area to submit some of her paintings into an art show, and it was raining on her way back home. She was very nervous and almost lost concentration on the road when something yelled in her ear. It brought her back to reality, scared but alert. Around this time I was tired at night and went to bed early. While lying there, I turned over and saw an entity staring at me from the end of the bed. It slowly ducked behind the bed until I couldn't see it anymore. Imagine the girl from The Ring without her hair in her face. Yeah, that's pretty much what I saw. I found out later that this is what many of the people at the hotel where my wife worked were seeing. My wife had a dream later where she came face to face with this entity, and it took the form of one of her darker paintings. She didn't realize it until later when she was explaining what it looked like. Once she realized what it was mimicking, she decided she'd had enough, and we went and picked up supplies to cleanse and smudge the apartment. Upon doing so, we felt the energy going from room to room, almost like we were chasing it. At one point, having the windows open, we heard a very loud and angry scream coming from outside of the window. The temperature was below freezing out, but after we finished cleansing our apartment, the rooms instantly got warm for no reason. Note, the main heater was busted at this time, so we only had a small one, not nearly large enough to heat the whole apartment to be above freezing, much less warm. It felt like a completely different place. In fact, it really still does, and these events feel like a lifetime ago, even though they happened less than a year ago. We still have things that happen from time to time, but nothing to the extent of what we dealt with then. In fact, upon typing all of this about 2 hours ago, I had gone into my bedroom to hassle my wife for leaving me in the living room and lying down. After doing so, I left the room, only to have her call me back in there. She asked if I had smacked the bed when I left, which I had not. I was well out of the room before stopping the conversation. That freaked her out, so here we are now. She is lying on the couch in the living room, and I am typing this up. I suppose that will have to do for now. I hope you can all enjoy this. Happy spooky season. Paranormal enthusiasts, I need your thoughts. Was it paranormal, and what did I encounter then? This story wasn't really flashy or outrageous with things falling from shelves or screams, but more subtle and kind of innocuous, for the most part, and confusing, still freaked me out. It happened some 4 years ago. I'm 19 now, so the order of all the bits isn't that fresh in my brain, but I was intrigued for so long. How would paranormal enthusiasts explain this? The story itself. I was spending the summer in Berigovo, Ukraine, with my grandpa, staying at his friend's house. She was super into the whole psychic TV show thing. We have Battle of Extrasenses here, but there are similar ones in other countries. I could talk more about her if you want, since she was a character for sure, like the kind of grandmas who believe any bullshit on TV and conspiracies, but we would be here all day. I guess every proper creepy story starts with a weirdo grandma. The house was an old Soviet apartment, super cluttered and messy, and had cockroaches but was not creepy. The weird stuff started happening when I was sitting on the bed, reading a book, and a bedside lamp started turning on and flickering. I saw it in my peripheral vision but also with light falling on my book. But every time I looked at it, it turned off. I'm skeptical, but after this happened continuously, I was, for some reason, just creeped out. I didn't panic, but I got shivers and just closed the book and super quickly walked out of the room without looking at or acknowledging the lamp. Later I calmed down, walked back, saw the lamp was turned off, and moved the bedside table away from the wall to look at cables and fix whatever was happening, short circuit or whatever, I don't know. I'm not an electrician, only to realize the lamp wasn't even plugged in. I talked to my dad, and he said that the next time this happens, I should thank the ghost to see what will happen, since it seems as if it saw me reading and tried turning the light on for me and probably was afraid of me too. Kinda like a child or small animal being like, ooh, human looking at book. I see them turning on the light when they do this. I should do this. My dad said that from what stories he read, it looked like these small house spirits have the mental level of a little child or a mischievous crow and are kind of cautious of humans, not wanting to be perceived. And the most important thing is to not be afraid. Was it the case here? Who knows, considering the rest of the story. Also, I don't remember if she said this before or after the next encounter, but the lady at one point told me that there once was a barabushka in this house, and it would sort of creepily stand/hover over her when she was in bed at night, just kind of hanging there, but it disappeared and never appeared again after she called a priest to spray the house with holy water, blessing it, but yeah, I'd give it worked considering the second encounter. Barabushka is something like a poltergeist or harmless house spirit that makes sounds, I think. I'd where the folklore about it came from originally. I was in bed, I don't remember if I was falling asleep or woke up in the middle of the night, but I suddenly heard something breathing over me. Just standing there and breathing. I don't know how long it lasted, because I was afraid to move or lift my blanket. I sometimes sleep with it over my head, and it felt like a few minutes at least, but perhaps stress just made it feel longer. I just lay still, listening in, thinking maybe it is my grandpa standing there, checking if I'm okay or something, but was too afraid to lift the blanket to actually see. Obviously I was interested in what the hell that was, and even then I was thinking, even if it's a ghost, what is it going to do? Breathe at me harder? Punch me? It obviously can't physically hurt me, but I was still afraid to open my eyes properly or move or lift my blanket. Like as if fabric was going to protect me from being attacked or something? I was trying to convince myself that it's just my grandpa, but seriously, as I was listening, it didn't sound male or female, let alone like an old man. Raspy but still too high to be his voice. But after a while it faded away and stopped. And I quietly called to my grandfather, being like, "Hey, was it you standing over me?" Since his bed was across the room, and he woke up and was like, "Huh? What? Yeah, sure," and just went to sleep, and I was like, "Oh, okay. Great." And just went to sleep myself a bit less worried because I convinced myself it was him. But then I recalled everything in the morning and was like, wait a damn minute. No sound of him lying back on the bed. There were some other sounds, but I'm not even sure if it was walking. Could be. He was already asleep and woke up when I called him. Even if it was him, that is just weird ass behavior. Who even does that? Just getting up from bed at night and standing over someone without moving for 3 minutes or something and loudly breathing? Bro. The next thing was me getting sick. I would be dead in a horror movie because I don't know how I didn't notice the correlation until years later, but every single year I stayed in that house, I would get sick in some way. I visited Baragovo 2 times before and never saw paranormal activity until that last time I'm writing about. And each time I would get something. Headaches, nausea, wanting to puke but not being able to, and high temperature. Each time we wrote it off as either overheating from the sun, food poisoning, or something else and didn't really pick up on a pattern of it happening each time I was in that place. Plus we couldn't really pinpoint any specific illness, just a mishmash of symptoms, a general feeling unwell. And the third time I visited, I got my period, and it was the most excruciating FING period I had to date. Seriously. I know some women have super bad ones on average. I don't usually have super painful periods. I did have some super painful periods before, but painkillers helped quickly, but this time I was straight up in agony. Couldn't find any position to alleviate it and was straight up moaning and howling in pain. The old lady basically told me to suck it up and get used to it since I'm a girl and that you will have even worse periods / they will get even worse. But I did get painkillers and got rid of the pain slowly. Still confused why she thought periods are supposed to just get progressively more painful as you get older? I was like, is something wrong? I never get periods this painful. And she was like, well, duh? Of course they will get even more painful than now. Spoiler, I never had any periods like that since I came back from that damn place. But yeah, whatever was going on in that house, it wasn't outright dangerous, but the vibes weren't good for my health. Next on the list, I had a fever for a day or two. Again, I don't remember if it was before or after the period thing. Both my grandfather and that lady were out, and I was left alone at home. I mostly chilled in the living room, reading. Lamp things didn't happen that day. Then I went to the kitchen, it was super small, BTW, to make some tea. As I was pouring it, I heard what I thought was the old housekeeper lady behind me, so I started turning around to say, good morning. Only to hear something frantically run in panic, slip and run into the ducking table when turning on the corner, and then loudly run down the hallway. And I was just left there standing with my cup in hand. And it didn't feel like a dream, it wasn't even an am I hearing this, or is this something else? No, I was standing there, thinking while it was still running down the hallway that I am actually physically hearing this with my ears WTF, like my brain is registering the sound the same as the sound of a dog or car. It didn't feel surreal, it just felt real. And I want to preface that it wasn't the feeling of OMG, something is behind me, I'm being stalked. No. Instead, it was oh. Mrs. Karen is behind me. Didn't hear her coming home. Gotta say hi. Good mo? For a second I thought about the person behind me being way taller than that lady. It wasn't even a full thought, just a dissonance in my brain because I remembered that the old lady was shorter than me and the figure was way taller, looming over me. I don't know how, but you know how you can feel when someone is right near / behind you, not even in a creepy way necessarily? Maybe it's just air moving on the hairs of your skin or straight up feeling auras? The thing is, you could explain this with hallucination from the fever, but my temperature was like 38 degrees or something that day, and I never in my life had hallucinations from a fever before or after, or in any other location. But I guess there is always a possibility. This wasn't the only time something was behind me, it happened more than twice. Like I was walking out of the bathroom and felt someone behind me walking right in my steps. I'm talking 5 centimeters from my back, stepping in my steps, no fever that day. I didn't see anything physically, I don't know where I got this image from, but for some reason I got an image of a tall, lanky IT-looking guy in glasses. I told my dad about it, and he said, yup, There was a guy like that living there at some point. He isn't dead or anything, he is just fine to this day, probably. I also asked if there was a dog in the apartment, because I did hear animal sounds, and there was at one point. And there was a dog in the apartment at one point too. Also an image in my mind of a tall, big, chubby man also behind me. He is also just fine and still living in that house in the other room, just not coming that often since I think he works as a border guard. So it seems like it is some kind of entity that copies human and animal forms like how a parrot copies sounds. From more miscellaneous things, I would often hear grandfathers and that lady's steps when they were not walking around at all or just a big dog walking, which I thought was coming from outside until later. I can recognize people by their steps. I'd guess this is normal for everyone or a trauma response from childhood. It still could be sounds from neighbors upstairs. Also, sounds of plates from the kitchen when there was no one there and random objects disappearing and appearing in weird locations. My grandpa would be frustrated that I forget where I put my things, but you know. I don't usually put my sunscreen under a stack of magazines. I remember, later I found out about a mold that has weird properties and a theory that many haunting stories take place in old moldy houses that cause people to have minor sound hallucinations and feelings of being watched, etc. And I thought it checked out. Old cluttered Soviet panel house, sounds, memory problems, perhaps it even explains why I had headaches and health problems in that location. I thought that the mystery was solved until I remembered that once I was sitting in my room and suddenly heard the sound of someone running down the hallway whose steps I didn't recognize, and my grandpa shouted from the other room for me to stop running around loudly. So not only did my grandpa hear it at the same time as me, but also apparently that thing was copying me as well. I was telling everything that was happening to my dad on the phone, and he gave me an idea to set up a camera. I had a Canon with me, and try to catch it on film. He also gave me an idea that since this creature is like a naughty child, hiding my things and messing around, I could bait it with a box of knickknacks. It would get curious like a crow and try to get inside. So I got an old box and put some colorful things in it, like bracelets and hair ties and candy wrappers and whatever I had on hand and whatever I thought the creature hadn't seen before. Left the box half closed and set up the camera. Nothing really happened, the camera died quite quickly, and it didn't have much space. All I caught was a big fat fly crawling around lol. I tried this again and again in every room. The only time anything happened was a shiny spoon disappearing when I went to the other room for my camera after hearing sounds in the kitchen. But I'm inclined to believe it was just the old lady doing her thing. But I was getting more and more determined, and I'd Gwen, but at some point my fear just changed to obsession and drive. It was all I could think about. Trying to investigate every potential suspicious sound. In the end nothing really happened. Kind of anticlimactic, but at some point I realized how quiet it is. Like it turned out way more sounds that I never even registered as the creature just disappeared. No dog sounds that I thought were coming from the outside all the time, the upstairs neighbors turn out weren't really loud at all, and kitchen sounds are much rarer. I guess people don't cook there that often. Somehow it became creepier without that entity than it was with it. So either my mind was playing tricks on me, or I creeped out the damn ghost so much it said, "Duck this shit," and left.